The West has fallen. Why? Because of like degeneracy.
Mm.
And the evidence of that is often look at modern architecture compared to a cathedral.
Right.
You know, how did
Jesus banger from Queen. I don't know. Thank you, McDonald's, for hiring those facing federal job losses. Every family deserves to earn a living, and that's why we raised our minimum wage in Virginia to $15. Okay.
this happen,
Thanks.
Western man? Right? Ridiculous meme posts. We used to be a proper country. Like, and the image attached to that caption is a 7.
If I was a real socialist revolutionary type, I think that video would make me feel insane. This is exactly the type of people that my society would make illegal. Yeah, but you have to consider, like, this is kind of what all socialism turned into. It's why one of the reasons why these societies failed so much. For every one Che Guevara you'd have, 100 million LARPer socialist people that as soon as they would get into power would just enrich themselves, kill everybody else, and basically just sit on their laurels and be little dictators to enrich themselves and their friends.
11 ad from the 1970s. So it's like,
Really?
yeah. It's
Wow.
like, look at this advertising image from 3 decades ago.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be better if we were still like that?
Welcome to Doomscroll. I'm your host, Joshua Citarella. My guest is Natalie Wynn, a video essayist and content creator. I have to talk at the EU Parliament later this month
Really?
about how the left can compete with the online right. What should I tell them?
What were Che Guevara's politics? He was this hardcore socialist, no? Fighting against the capitalist, fascist, evil people or whatever was in his mind or whatever. I mean, for a lot of the regimes he fought against, I imagine that probably was true. Nope, somebody said not really. Well, I don't know that much about Che Guevara, so.
The reason I have a difficult time answering this question is that a lot of the reasons why the online right has the reach it does are things we would not want to emulate.
Mm-hmm.
For example, a lot of online right commentators are frankly backed by money.
Yep.
Like not like crowdfunding money,
Yep.
like institutional money.
Yeah.
And
Big money, deep pockets.
Yeah, exactly. So sometimes it's like, do we want that?
Mm-hmm.
I think that for a lot of people on the left, the idea of having like oligarchs backing you would be kind of defeat the purpose.
Well, the
Right.
NGOs.
Yeah.
Those
No, that's
exist,
true.
liberal
That's true.
NGOs. Yeah.
That's true. For a couple years now, people have been talking about like, what if we had a leftist Joe Rogan? Like, wouldn't like, do we want a
Oh,
leftist
yeah, I've never heard
Joe
that one
Rogan? Do we
before.
want
Yeah.
a leftist Joe Rogan? I don't know. Like, I mean, I don't. But would it be useful to have one?
Mhm.
Maybe. I'm sure I would hate it.
Mm.
But so what? I mean, I think the reality, like if I will lecture men for not wanting to be in a coalition with their mother. Well, I also think I am going to have to deal with being in a coalition with some kind of leftist manosphere.
Right.
And I'm prepared to just deal with that.
Right.
Right? Like, I think that part of my like realistic electoralist idea about politics is accepting that I'm going to have to be in a coalition with a bunch of people I don't like.
Mhm.
Because that's
What a coalition is.
at a national election in the United States means having the support of a very wide group of people.
You're telling me that
Yeah.
77 million people can't belong to the same subculture?
Yeah, 77 million people are probably not going to look into the camera and say, I'm the same kind of communist you are. Like,
Damn
it's never going to happen. Which means
can't
accepting,
possibly
like,
vote with them.
it means accepting, like, a wide amount of ideological diversity.
Mhm.
And I think that, I think the reason that Joe Rogan is so successful is there's this kind of, like, front of, like, I'll just talk to anyone and everyone is welcome. In practice, that's not really true because he doesn't really have very much in the way of, like, I don't think there's ever been a trans person, for example, on Joe Rogan, except maybe Blair White, a conservative, reactionary trans person.
There's an ideological strain to the particular type of guest that
Yeah,
you would
for
say
sure.
like
Yeah.
libertarian to
I think Joe Rogan would talk to anybody. I think, like I said, I think what happened was, I think Joe Rogan, people are looking at this very complex analysis of like, how does the conservative party create like a figure like this? Joe Rogan just got mind by what was online. The conservative party is good at messaging because they have all their media figures and all their political figures in a row. So they all say the exact same message. Joe Rogan saw it online, got captivated by it, brainwashed by it. And then from there, he slowly became an unwitting conservative operative. But not because it was like some deliberate like mind control over Joe Rogan from conservatives. It's just, it was just that. It was just him getting brainwashed by online shit.
whatever kind of skeptic.
But I also think that like the right is so talented, it kind of in a soft kind of way. They love bomb, right? I mean, I've experienced it myself. When in periods, this has happened on a recurrent basis for 10 years. Every few months, like some large faction of the online left decides that I am like the villain of the month, right? And it will just be a mess. It doesn't bother me that much anymore because it's kind of become like, well, there's only so many times it can happen before you start like taking it less seriously. But I think that it used to really upset me, as it upsets most people when it happens initially, because it's kind of not. I mean, the normal when a bunch of people are screaming at you and telling you you're a horrible person. I mean, the ego's instinct is to defend itself, right? But when that's often happened to me, I often am reached out to by people on the right who are like, hey, like I see what's happening to you on Twitter.
Yeah,
That's like really horrible what they're saying to you. Like, do you want to come on my podcast sometime?
Right.
Like that's kind kind of their like recruitment method. Is like they reach out, they sort of exploit the divisiveness and the vitriol of leftist spaces to kind of like lure people out.
So division.
Yeah. Well, and especially because like there is like a genuine kind of like tall poppy syndrome type thing on the left. And we sort of talked about
What
this.
is tall poppy syndrome?
Okay, so tall poppy syndrome is a notion that like tall grass gets cut, let's say. So like if you rise to a certain level of prominence, the left
become
turns
the target.
on you. And I think part of that is the same hipster mindset that leads leftists to turn on a politician who gets elected. Right? Is that it's like, well, now you're the establishment. There's a little micro version of that happens in influencer world where I mean, early in my YouTube career, you know, a lot of people, I think I probably have lost a large percentage of my earliest audience because a lot of people liked me because they saw me as this kind of like, you know, a queer transgender underdog who was like they related to. And then I got too big and they don't relate to me anymore and they resent me for getting too big. And it's like, I think that then like caused like a kind of extreme moral, extremely like, you know, stringent.
So wouldn't Joe Rogan of the left be like moist critical or something? Yeah, but it's not about, first of all, the thing that makes Joe Rogan valuable was that he was relatively apolitical and his audiences were able to be collected from non-political spaces. That was the big like value of Joe Rogan. But the reality is that the Democratic Party does not have the messaging apparatus like the Republican Party does. So you're never going to create those figures online like the Republican Party can. You just can't do it. You don't have the messaging apparatus for it. It'll never happen. The far left people have developed that messaging apparatus. That's why they move so similar to MAGA and Trump in the way that their figures work. So like Hassan and the dog shocking thing is a really good example. They can lie to you about what you see on TV, but all of their people are in lockstep agreement about it. So as long as enough people are repeating the same thing, you know, eventually people will assume, I guess it's probably true. And then they all like do like preferential and friendly interviews with each other. There's no critical pushback. So you're never actually confronted with an opposing opinion. And then you get sucked down into that kind of like media black hole of same thought. And yeah, it's the very far left people have done the same thing that the MAGA movement has done, but the Democratic Party hasn't figured that out yet.
Moral purity that was expected of me and that I was not able to deliver on.
The degree to which
Asmongold is going over your tweet, LOL. Which one?
the audience can turn on the creator also is fanatical because it was their like favorite thing. It was that subcultural identity before. And now that they feel in some way betrayed, it's like they just kind of unload all of that kind of parasocial fanaticism into this new outlet of, oh, I actually hate that person. I've hated their stuff the whole time.
And that's not just a leftist thing. Like I do think that on the right,
I think it's just
everyone kind of hates each other on the right too, right? Like, but they're somehow able to like, I think maybe it's because they believe in loyalty on some level. They when it counts, like they come together to support daddy. Whereas the left doesn't do this, not really.
I see.
So I don't know. It's not that there's no leftists online, but I also think that like there's a struggle to convey leftist ideas to like less radicalized people. So I mean, I think that's what Joe Rogan's real utility is to the right.
To talk to normal
is that he
people.
seems like a normal guy, right? Or at least there was a time when he seemed like a normal guy. He is now kind of a little bit.
He's moved. But he's also backed off of the Trump stuff too.
No, that's true. But I think
big audience has to include normal people who are not like political ideologues.
And it's tough to do that on the left because if you have a guest who has said, you know, XYZ problematic thing, there'll be a bunch of leftists online screaming at you for platforming fascists or whatever, right? So the temptation is to maintain the boundaries of the cloister. I don't know. It's hard to say like what the solution to that is. I mean, like you have the Democratic politicians like Gavin Newsom like do this where he's like, I'll talk to anyone. Like, yeah, I'll talk to Ben Shapiro. Yeah, I'll talk to, you know, but people don't like that on the left. They don't like.
So she's technically not correct there. It used to kind of be that way that the left would like cancel you for things, and maybe that shouldn't be what's going on because it makes it hard for us to build a coalition if we're progressive or whatever. But you can see now that the far left, as they've like emulated the kind of MAGA model, they don't cancel you anymore, right? They'll defend Plattner for over Nazi tattoos. They don't care. Or they'll support Steyer because they feel like he's on their team, even though he's a billionaire. These people have spent their entire online lives talking about how billionaires are intrinsically evil. So they've also learned, the far left have adopted the MAGA playbook in terms of how they support people and accept people. And they don't purity test or cancel as long as you're on their team.
Like it. Or like I know trans people in particular feel super betrayed by Gavin Newsom like saying he's willing to kind of back off on the trans stuff because it's not popular. It's not popular.
Well, that's so I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here, but just to kind of recap, there's trying to diagnose this is actually it's a pretty big situation. Like famous Media Matters study, I think 25 says that 90% of alt media is conservative leaning, right? So the temptation is to look at that as a reflection of where the political sentiments of most people in the country are. Obviously, social media is a very distorted mirror. Not 90% of the country is conservative, obviously.
So I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean,
there actually is a volume problem.
It's extraordinary. So they're doing a quantitative survey. There's different ways to slice the numbers. They're including like Trevor Noah is part of the left. So we could dispute the way that they classify it, but I think obviously whether it's 90% or 80%, it doesn't matter. Alt media overwhelmingly conservative. And the reasons, I'm just recapping some of the things that you said. So jump in if I'm missing.
Trevor Noah is absolutely part of the left, but okay.
Characterizing, but asymmetry of resources. So you got big donors, and then just like bait, they can kind of sow division, look at trend cycles, whatever's trending, and jump on sensational topics. And then the third is that some of the positions on the left are unpopular in a majoritarian democracy. So we can fix 1 and 2. How do we deal with 3?
Well, I actually think people aren't going to like this. I mean, I think there's certain issues on the left that the most high-profile spokespeople are actually like warranted in avoiding. Like, I personally think that at this point, like the Democratic Party should not talk about trans people. And I think that because, I mean, it's frustrating for a lot of reasons, right? Because so much of what the general public thinks the Democratic thinks about trans people is completely information that they've gotten from right-wing propaganda. Because it's over, like the Democratic Party already...
I think this is I think it's a morally losing strategy. I understand what Contra is thinking here in terms of like, it's just become such a bad position for Democrats. But like what you need Democrats who can talk about trans issues, but have like a limiting principle. Like they genuinely believe in the topic and they know like where they stand on it, rather than you are quote unquote pro-trans and then you just have to endlessly capitulate to this far left lunacy that exists on social media, right? Like I think rather than abandoning trans issues entirely, Democrats should be able to present it as a healthcare issue, which it is, and then say that, parents have a right to do, their healthcare options for their children, and also be able to say, when it comes to NCAA sports and above, trans people and cis people shouldn't compete together. That should be a very easy position to occupy without having to go so far left that you lose 99% of people, and without, but without actually abandoning trans people that needs to have in this country. I don't know. I think you can have that position. It's just Democrats, as soon as they give in a little bit to the trans stuff, they have to go as far left as possible because there's just no limiting on any of the online activist shit.
They hardly ever talk about trans people to begin with. Like I've seen so many people suggest, for example, that like, oh, Kamala Harris, like, she pushed everyone away with all that trans ideology. And I'm like, what trans ideology? How many times on the campaign trail did Kamala Harris even mention trans people?
Yeah.
Not a lot of times.
I heard a lot about black men's crypto assets, but not trans people.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's so I think that people have like really been convinced what the left talks about by right media. And in part because like, well, I think right-wing media, they've also kind of mastered rage bait, right? And that you can just like churn out this content that's just designed to like irritate people. Look at what's happening in your daughter's sports. They're letting grown men beat girls up, right? Okay, is that true? Doesn't matter. Makes people angry. Gets attention, right? So I think that you say that, a lot of right-wing media says that and they say, this is what the Democrats are doing. And it's like, how much are the Democrats talking about trans sports? Basically not at all. Is the real answer to that question. But the right has really succeeded in convincing the public that that's what the left talks about.
Yeah.
So
and they do it 90% louder.
90% louder, yeah, as you say. Well, the question of how to respond to that, is it to publicly start arguing on the topic of trans sports? I don't think so. Because I think that one is so losing that it's like, I mean, I think deflection is kind of the answer. It's to say like...
What is deflection?
When they like, I don't know, in a debate situation, for example, if they want to go on and on about men and women's sports, observe that they are the one who keeps bringing this up. We're not talking about this. This is not part of our agenda. You are obsessed with this, right? In other words,
Graham Flatner does this a little bit.
Yeah. But to flip the obsession, to flip the obsession accusation.
Oh, I see.
Right?
I see.
Because it is like, I mean,
See, people try to find these strategies, but the reality is it doesn't work because the Republicans are good at getting people to panic about it. It works because all of them are lockstep in messaging. So you can try to flip it around, and it might work for an individual debate. But then as soon as a person who's a conservative who is in that media world goes back to watching that media world, it's just going to be them seeing a million times over like how obsessed Democrats are with the issue and all the horrible, evil things that Democrats, blah, 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 whatever the fuck they're seeing on social media. Like they just go right back to it.
I think back to like the sort of gay marriage debate in the Bush administration. I think one effective, or even like going back to like the 70s and the like...
What was going on in the 1970s with the origin of the gay rights movement?
With Anita Bryant, who was a big anti-gay, I mean, she'd originally been like a musician and who became sort of an anti-gay celebrity spokeswoman. Her credibility, I think, was destroyed in pop culture, in part by characterizing her as this sort of priggish moralist who was obsessed with what other people are doing in bed, right? I mean, I think that the way, here's a more positive and likable way I can say my point. Like, I think that one mistake that I genuinely think that trans people have made in our political messaging is that it's always better to, especially in America, where the national character is kind of averse to being told what to do. Like there's this kind of individualist cowboy thing where it's like we resent the government saying how to live our lives. So I think that the posture of the trans activist should be, don't tell me what I can do. Don't tell me what hormones I'm allowed to take. Don't tell me, the mistake that goes the other direction is to lecture everyone about how they need to put pronouns in their email. Because now you're not telling them not to tell you what to do. You're telling them what to do. People don't like being told what to do.
Right.
So don't tell them what to do. Don't tell them what to say. Tell them to leave you alone, right? And I think that's the kind of more convincing line. Is that my temptation is to kind of argue from the kind of triviality. Like really, you're expending this much resources on preventing essentially 10 people from competing in professional athletics. Why is this a major part of your platform? Don't you want to talk about the economy? How about the price of gas? I noticed that's happening increasingly lately. Maybe that has something to do with the war that your party started. I think that could be a pretty effective like whataboutism kind of retort to this transgender sports thing. Is like, why are you talking about transgender sports when the price of gas is well, we'll see how it is in a couple months, but I imagine $5. Yeah.
There's I picked this phrase up from you, but in your conspiracy video, Randolini's law, that the amount of energy needed to refute bullshit, meaning conspiracy theories in that context, is an order of magnitude bigger than that needed to produce it. So if you're trying to argue a point that is maybe not winnable, it's a useless expenditure of energy you should be talking about. I think Graham Flatner literally does this, where someone was trying to bring up trans issues in Maine, and he was like, well, what about this healthcare thing that we're not able to talk about? So I totally agree with this. I'm not going to leave you hanging out on a limb by yourself, but I think that is actually, while it may be unpopular for people who have political sentiments or share the same ideas that we do, this is what we need to advance in a majoritarian democracy, which is an uncomfortable but necessary conversation. You mentioned the leftist Joe Rogan before. I'm going to take us down a little bit of a path here because I want to hear your thoughts on this. This is maybe like the meat of what I'd like to discuss today. So post 2016, there's all of this right-wing content on YouTube.
Yeah.
I think think the premier example of this was the Kill Stream with Richard Spencer as a guest. This is like 2015, 16. We're going back here. I don't fully remember the history. It's at that time the most quantitatively or unprecedented amount of viewers on YouTube. They're like, oh shit, there's a really big problem here. And so the solution we came up with at that time was, if the right is dominating alt media or social media platforms.
Was that the Kill Stream? Was that always Ethan Ralph with Richard Spencer? Is that one of the bigger streams back then? Maybe it was. I don't remember. Maybe.
The left needs to have a role in that. And I was one of the people who argued vigorously for this in The Guardian and mainstream publications. The thing that we came up with was the leftist video essay, because our arguments were less mimetic. They needed to be explained in long form. And then you were one of the premier, most celebrated creators in that. I have immense admiration for your work. Fast forward 8 years, 2024. The podcast election, so to speak, we're talking about Joe Rogan and the Manosphere and the Nelk Boys and who else? All these other guys are named and thanked in the inauguration or Trump's victory speech by the campaign. So our solution now is to make left-wing podcasts, right? I think Adam Friedland is doing a great job at this. There's many different examples to look at. But I see pretty much a direct analogy where this was the strategy before. Now the left needs to participate in social media. And the right is winning in the influence base. And so now we need to participate. When do we get to the point where we admit that the platforms themselves are the problem?
They definitely
Well, that's a good question. Because if the platforms are the problem, then what?
Not good.
I mean, yeah.
I have a few ideas of then what. But
I'll just say that.
Oh no! What? Twitter communities will be deprecated on May 6th. What? Our community? No! Is gone? RIP. Storage Wars star Daryl Sheets found dead in apparent suicide at his Arizona home. According to police, he was 67 years old. What? They located a male subject who suffered from what appeared to be a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Daryl, why? Jenk. I'm a little disgruntled by the lack of grace some people on our side are showing people like Tucker Carlson for not only opposing Trump, but apologizing for supporting him. They definitely don't speak for Muslim Americans who are grateful for our new allies. The humanity Tucker, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Tom Massey and others have shown as they fought to help children in Gaza and to stop this war and to stop Israel's genocide has been amazing and appreciated. If some pundits on the left demand we condemn people who have shown millions of our fellow Americans on the right that we deserve compassion too, my answer is a firm no. I love how none of this grace was shown for Liz Cheney, but for like the worst of the worst that humanity has to offer, these people are somehow willing to welcome them in, but okay. This was an LSF post that went up a while ago. Prank YouTube channel Rao and YouTube received a €5 donation to prank call someone's unstable nephew. Said nephew shot and killed 2 Syrian refugees minutes later. Round YouTube quickly deletes the stream from his channel and denies being live. What the f? Hold on. And then, yeah, Laura Loomer lost a defamation case against Bill Maher. Commentary YouTuber Quinthio discovers that all the mods on Pirate Software's mod team have quit, including Kronos, the mod that Pirate would use as an intimidation tactic. It's speculated that Pirate was dramatic towards his mods.
Making this video right now. And no, it's not because it's a Pirate video. I'm not going for the sarcasm route here. Pirate Software's crew, more specifically his first mate, that being Kronos, his head moderator, and the rest of his mod team have either been fired or jumped ship. And in doing a bit of research, there has been some very interesting details that have come out surrounding this mass exodus/firing that has just gone down. Like Pirate apparently calling Kronos a parasite, as well as the rest of the moderation team seemingly starting to jump onto the Pirate Software hate train. We had some sleeper cells from Quaker Nation infiltrate the very public Discord that Kronos has himself, where he hopped into a voice call alongside a lot of the other mods who seemed to just be chatting. And it seems that they were having some conversations in regard to their tenure working for Pirate Software, and I would say the negative aspects of that, which are going to become very apparent. And I thought making this video right now.
RIP.
That I basically agree with the history of that you've drawn. Like, I mean, I think that I was also there in 2015, noticing this exact same thing happening. I had the same experience you just described of like I was like telling everyone.
I named you.
And I was like, look what's happening with like the internet is going fascist. And everyone would be like, well, so what? Like that's just the internet. They're just trolls. Like why don't you ignore them? Like why do you care about that?
Now they're in charge of the government.
So
it's a big deal.
So right, we were right to take it seriously. In other words, now I think at the time I had a far over optimistic idea about how it could. I mean, my solution, and when I tried to enact myself, was to make counter content. Right, to make content that would sort of debunk or argue against or attempt to present like an attractive alternative. Right, where because at the time what I diagnosed as a problem was that you had this kind of right wing that seemed sort of fun in terms of like the edgy, transgressive.
Do you know how hard it has been to get people on the show to admit that it was like attractive to people? Yeah, that it was like countercultural, it was edgy, it was punk.
It was completely intuitive to me at the time.
If you're like a 14-year-old boy, like that's just awesome.
Especially. Yeah. And because like so much of that content, well, at the time it wasn't called woke, it was called SJW, Social Justice Warrior. And so much of the right-wing media on YouTube at the time was about dunking on that, taking angry feminists, triggered feminists, and then dunking on them, ha ha ha, you're so stupid, you're so illogical.
Sargon of Akkad.
Yeah, exactly, that type of content. And so my idea was to counter that by creating a persona, basically, a persona that's not that far from my actual personality, which I'm also irritated by moralism, basically, right? Like I find that I'm attracted to the transgressiveness, right? And so I thought, like, look, I can do this in like a non-priggish way, and I got somewhere with that. But the thing is, like, ultimately, I think partly it is Brandolini's law type stuff, and partly it's my own artistic ambition in a way that impeded the ability of me to mass produce content in the way that the right-wingers do.
It was also people in like our role is that we're in media, and journalists would say this too, but indirectly they were saying that people like me are the answer, that we can make better narratives, and that was also allowing them upward mobility and opportunity. But you've anticipated exactly where I'm bringing this. Brandolini's law, I recognize at a certain point that, you know, whatever kind of downward mobility, post-neoliberalism, whatever we're in now, this was producing more right-wingers than we could recruit and educate by using alternative media. Do you feel like the DRAD project was a success in that period, or how do you look back on it now?
I don't think I would say it was a success. No, not the de-radicalization aspect of it, and that's for a couple of reasons. One is I just don't think the leftist video essay is not a solution to the problem of overwhelming right-wing propaganda.
Right.
It's just too niche, and it appeals. It has an audience that it appeals to, certainly, right? Which makes it a viable career. But is it a solution to right-wing radicalization? No.
Right.
I think part of the reason is that here's a way I've really changed how I do de-radicalization.
Okay.
I actually don't think anyone gets de-radicalized on the internet. I think that the internet is where you get radicalized.
Sure.
I think what de-radicalizes people is being offline, is having community, is having meaningful work, is having connections to other people.
Not being socially atomized.
Not being socially atomized. Yeah, that's what de-radicalizes people.
Yeah.
So I think that everyone on social media tends to get radicalized. A worry that I have about the leftist podcast as a solution to the right-wing podcast is that it also kind of becomes a new form of radicalization that I question the utility of. In other words, a lot of political podcasts, in one way or another, end up having a kind of like Fox News-like function, or like Rush Limbaugh-like function, where like I do think that in some ways the political podcast is kind of like Fox News for millennials, where like okay, you're listening to an angry man talk to you all day about what to be angry about.
Yeah.
That's obvious. I mean, that has been a winning formula for decades for media. And
are you still allies with ContraPoints? Allies? I guess. Sure. People keep posting your tweets on the sub, so I watched some of your old comments with her, and they were pretty good. Is there a reason you'll stop talking? I think my shit just got too hot online, basically. But we've never had any personal problems or anything. No.
I think that would I prefer them to be listening to a leftist angry man? Absolutely. But I also think that, I don't know, sometimes I just look at the state of it, and it's like, okay, well, we've gone from like Fox News screaming about the Democrats all day to Marxist podcasters screaming about the Democrats all day.
Bro.
I know that I'm regarded as a Democratic shill in many of these spaces, and I'm certainly not being that allegation at the moment. But like the reason that we view the right-wing media as so damaging is that it costs people to vote for Donald Trump. Don't we want people to vote for more liberal candidates? Like to me, that's the goal. And I worry that the kind of left-wing radicalization, it lures the audience into a kind of impotent radical chic or something, where it's like, okay,
subcultural.
You're in an oppositional counterculture that views non-participation in politics as basically the pragmatic outcome of because posting isn't participation, it doesn't count.
Can I give an example here just to kind of like codify what we're talking about? So the thing that I think was missed in the Joe Rogan analogy is that it's a mainstream podcast that's not about politics. That's why normal people like it, because they're talking about all sorts of stuff and it's fun or lighthearted. Politics is happening, and so that's the thing to comment on if you're in like a weekly news cycle. Here's what's happening today is my take on it. That kind of naturally happens. But the problem with the kind of political media first, or like left-wing Joe Rogan or leftist video essay thing, was that the buyers of political media.
Vosh harassed Contra. Why? I don't remember why, but I remember something. It was an unhinged tweet. I feel like Contra tweeted something that wasn't that controversial, and then I think Vosh, like, he either tweeted this or he told his audience, like, every single one of you has a moral obligation to harass the out of ContraPoints until she's deleting these tweets or something like that. I don't remember what it was about, but it was pretty unhinged.
Are not the median or modal voter in the US. And so if you look at these quantitative analytics from subcultural communities, I'm going to give a weird example here, so bear with me. In the furry community, there's a staggering statistic that 70% of the people who participate in that subculture have purchased an original piece of art, meaning they have like spent their money to consume something from that subculture.
Oh, it might have been Vosh's sexism art, because Vosh, and Hassan too, I guess men in general, listen, what are we going to do? We just hate women. Probably feels a little sexist sometimes, I think. And that definitely came across in the, it was either with that Cat Black person that he fought with, or it was with J.K. Rowling.
If you're publishing, let's say like a Substack that's about tennis or whatever kind of mainstream thing, you could expect to monetize about 7% of your following. So if you look at the fringes or subcultural interests that are not mainstream, there's an order of magnitude increase in people's willingness to pay and contribute towards that. And when you lead with the politics, kind of just as we described before, the asymmetry of resources, the distortion of the attention economy, all of these things, that is an additional multiplier on how distorted the landscape is of people's actual sentiments. So it becomes really, really difficult to advance the necessary broad coalition of 77 million people that are all going to make a shared decision and have a coherent narrative if we're starting from the like vanguard political leftist position.
Right, which is not going to attract 77 million people, which is not.
It's not. No, it is necessarily a vanguard. It is not the popular
right. Yeah, well, I do think that some of them, I mean, even in the video essay, peak left video essay era, like a lot of the people who are doing that most effectively help build an audience in part also by talking about some other thing. Video games, movies.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And then politics was
video
kind
games
of
are fascist also.
Ways. Yeah. Well, video Steve Bannon figured this out in 2014. Like that way that, he noticed that online gaming space spaces were basically a huge resource of frustrated young men without much political direction, and he just saw that this was exploitable. And so that
they are, however, in functioning economic socialist models, like the internal guild organization is a workers' co-op. So
there's Wash's comments about the person wearing stockings. Yeah, Jesus Christ, that was too much.
Incredible irony here.
But I feel like that has not been as effectively used by the left as it has by the right.
Yes. Before we get too sidetracked on the side quest of video games, I want to refocus us on how do we make online discourse work. I think it's in the conspiracy video, but you talk about we need good conversations to do democracy. I'm paraphrasing here, but what are the kind of preconditions for this Habermasian public square? How do we have good conversations for deliberative democracy?
It's harder than ever, is my feeling. Like I used to think this was possible. I mean, I used to go on these like debates even with so there's two problems with it, with debating right-wing people. One is that the right-wing people they're not interested in participating in a Habermasian public square. They're interested in owning you for clicks, right?
This is true of everybody, by the way. It's not unique to the right wing, but
damn it. The second and then the second problem is that your own leftist audience feels betrayed that you dared talk to someone on the right because they suggest that maybe means you're betraying them and you're maybe thinking of going over to the right, because why would you talk to someone on the right if you weren't on the right?
Right.
It's very hard to overcome this guilt by association thing. So it's like a pincer. Like you're discouraged from doing it both by the way you're treated by the right, which is as an exploitable resource for them to create attention moments, and you're criticized on moral grounds by the left for associating with the enemy, which kind of made it to me just not worth doing at all.
Right.
Now I'm sure some people are able to do this. Like men have to do this. I'll just say it. I can't do it. Like
debate.
Yeah, debate favors men.
Yeah.
Because
probably true.
It
Unfortunately,
favors assertiveness, aggression, owning the enemy with facts and logic.
Yeah.
Even it's not that women can't do that; they can. It's just that when women do it, it's perceived as like
bitchy and cunty and bossy,
unfeminine aggression.
Did you ever see that movie Town Bloody Hall?
No.
Jermaine Greer and who was the I forget the name of the writer. Do you remember the writer? Norman Mailer, right?
I have seen that. Yeah.
But it's like I'm not on his side of the argument, but like his basically being a dick to them was incredibly powerful versus these like very comprehensively and like well-spoken arguments against him. And he's just like, yeah, that's all bullshit. Like, and it's really strong in a debate format.
Yeah, Trump just by pure.
Is this the video?
She's wearing a skirt.
Okay, I don't want to play like I don't like running down like the greatest hits or whatever, but I guess Vosh is still bad faith to me, so I don't know. But this was a lot. Jesus Christ. This woman, I think she was criticizing Vosh for, I don't know if it was sexism or related to sexism. I think it was. And then this was his, I think, response to the call. Oh, because it was related to the J.K. Rowling stuff.
Wearing a skirt with stockings. She just wants to live in Mad Men and be sexually harassed by like the office boys.
I'm sorry? Beg your pardon, sir. What was that? What do I want?
She just wants to live in Mad Men and be sexually harassed.
Yes, boy, you caught me. I just want to be sexually harassed.
It was a little much.
Obvious. Practically poor I am.
The short skirt plus like the stockings and the so on.
Force of intimidation and like aggressive posturing is able to be perceived as winning.
So I agree that debate is in some cases necessary. And I don't think, just to be very clear on all these things, like it's good to have leftist video essays, it's good to have leftist podcasts. We're just saying that it is insufficient to win in the scale of a national election, and if that's the strategy that we're trying to achieve, we need more on top of it. What do you think about repealing Section 230 for platforms that have algorithmic recommendation?
I don't know. I mean, algorithmic recommendation as opposed to what?
I could answer that one.
As opposed to like Substack, Patreon, you voluntarily opt into a thing. It's not recommended to you. And so that reduces proportionally the sensationalism and the advertising revenue engine. It doesn't necessarily eliminate extremism, but it means you have to like click in.
Almost,
you gotta opt in.
It's hard not to think that would be good at this point for me. I think I don't know how I don't know. I think it's going to be fought very intensely by the most powerful people in the country because that's how they make a lot of money from it.
So I agree. Yeah. But we are watching with this takeover of TikTok. Yeah. Right. I'm trying to chip away at this because I agree. These are the libertarian like techno-capitalist class is basically the most powerful people that have existed in human history. Right. How are we going to like force a law against them? Yeah. But they're kind of doing it already with TikTok. Yeah. Like they may actually put parameters around political speech on social media anyway. Yeah. And so there may be a few avenues.
TikTok have like American. I mean, because I feel like with TikTok they're able to sort of frame it as like foreign interference with American media, whereas we have like our own domestic oligarchs who are going to defend Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and YouTube, right? But I do think that I don't know. I mean, Twitter's kind of a fascinating situation because I feel like Elon Musk that thing over and basically they trust busted themselves, basically, right? Like they completely unforced, like created all these other Twitters that you can join, Threads, Blue Sky, I mean, I don't think those have the...
Not yet.
Yeah. I mean, the other problem is that like the thing about that algorithm is
they don't have it.
They really are, they're selling us crack. They really are. Yeah. Like, I'm hopelessly addicted to the thing, to be honest. Twitter, anyway. Okay. And it's partly because of the chaos and I find Blue Sky boring.
It is boring,
It's boring.
Yeah. I also don't believe that if a platform is predominantly leaning in one political direction, that like we should just send all of the liberals and leftists over to Blue Sky. Like I think you actually need to have those voices in the right-wing dominated platform like Twitter.
One more voucher.
Still the capital, Virginia?
Destiny.
This one.
Clowning on Vosh's accent slip up.
Yes?
I think my favorite Vosh clip of all time. This was a good one. When Vosh debates black people, he gets possessed by his Gusano slave-owning ancestors. Oh, man.
Actually politically represent my interests.
I'm not. My point here ain't about criticizing your vote. So that only 2 people were going to be president, and there were only 2 real paths to FBI.
No. But those are 2 different.
I don't know. I don't even.
And I picked this up from Rokana, actually. I wasn't sure that this was an actual thing that people were going to move forward with, but it does seem like there's legislation around it. And I'm kind of, I've put the now like 8 years of my adult life into this kind of research and material and the Gen Z social media interviews I did. I think that we need to get upstream of this process. And this is kind of the best thing that has come across my desk recently, because I think it is basically Brandolini's law. If we're trying to fight the right, what can we actually do in this space? It's clearly 90% dominated by them. We have to pull different levers.
Yeah, well, the idea of like regulating, I think that some kind of increased regulation of social media probably would be massively beneficial if it were done by the right people.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm always somewhat anxious about anything that counts as feels like censorship for fear of it. But I don't know. They're already doing censorship.
They're already, yeah.
That's the problem. Is they're already, Like, I wouldn't want this to happen under the Trump administration.
No.
But like advancing a proactive politics for the left, maybe that should be part of the 2028 platform, right?
No, maybe
jobs guarantee and repeal 230 for platforms.
The trick will be to find a way to sell this to the public in a way that doesn't seem like they can't be so easily framed as like authoritarian leftist takeover of free speech.
I got a suggestion.
Yeah.
You flip the trans thing. They're coming for your kids. The platforms.
Yes. No, that's actually a good idea. That's a good idea. Focus on like I don't know.
Did you see that the lawsuit where this girl? I should know the details of this if I'm bringing it up on the podcast. She was like 16 years old and they're suing for anxiety and emotional damages. The big platforms.
Yeah.
And this is now setting a precedent where Rial's the producer of the show, but he was telling me there's now class action lawsuits opening up against the platforms.
Well, that's a smart way to start. I think that I like your suggestion of doing it as some kind of think of the children thing in terms of I don't know. I just feel like it's going to end up you being like gravitate towards banning pornography, which like I'm not necessarily opposed to the idea that like pornography should maybe be slightly more ghettoized on something like Twitter, right? Where it's, as opposed to just like there it is in your feed all the time.
Right.
And certainly when you have like a significant portion of the website's users are underage. But then when it comes to something like vaccine misinformation, this was tried during the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
Where like Facebook and YouTube all kind of attempted to like instate misinformation restrictions, and that was viewed by many people as tyrannical.
They got hella mad.
I don't really have a solution to this, honestly.
So I'm asking you. I don't have a solution for it either, but it's something to explore. The last thing I want to touch on here for this topic of like counter messaging and
imagine being a social media company that was worried that people were going to fall prey to misinformation about vaccines, and now the government is is telling soldiers they don't have to get vaccinated if they don't want to, whatever. For Christ, just flu shots for now, but
and so forth. Is there some degree to which like BreadTube and Peter Kropotkin type politics from like 1892 was insufficient to scale to the crises of like 2020? Was that part of it too?
I always thought it was crazy that we were talking about Kropotkin so much. The term BreadTube, which derives from the conquest of bread, I have no idea where that came from. I always thought it was weird that it was applied to me.
Yeah.
I don't talk about Kropotkin. Like I'm not an anarchist. Like I don't know. But yeah, I do think that like I don't want to entirely disparage that the activity of reading theory. But I do think that like this kind of like priestly tendency of the left that there's this.
I like it. Okay.
Well, it's interesting, if you're an intellectual. But like, I think that is 19th century social and political theory like really the thing that we need to insist everyone be literate in? I don't think it should be. I think it's again useful for. I suppose you can call it a vanguard. I don't call myself a vanguard. That seems a little too self-congratulatory. I don't think that I'm useless. I'm not trying to be overly self-disparaging when I say that video essays are not the solution to the media environment. But I also like recognize that there's like serious limitations.
We wouldn't be doing this if we thought it was useless.
Right, I wouldn't be doing it if I thought it was useless. But it's also, like you say, insufficient.
To watch part 2 of this episode, you can support the show on Patreon.
I found the exact same thing, which is that.
Wait, what was the point of the bird?
Right, I wouldn't be doing it if I thought it was useless.
Meme of the
but
show?
It's also, like you say, insufficient.
To watch part 2 of this episode, you can support the show on Patreon.
Cinema.
I found the exact same thing, which is that like when you switch from academia to social media, you get rid of one problem, which is the like hyper specificity of the like. The reason the moment I dropped out of my PhD program was the moment when I was having to transfer from getting a master's degree, which I was doing as part of the PhD, to like okay, it's time to write a dissertation and choose a specialty. And it's like, do I want to spend the remainder of my 20s thinking about the same 3 paragraphs of Hegel? Like, no, I don't. I don't want to do that. That is like I could.
You don't want to do that?
You ever found like ways?
I know people who've been doing that for free.
Yeah, right.
Some people will.
So it seemed because like what I liked about philosophy like as an undergrad is like how it's this like sweeping tour from like Plato to like Foucault or whatever. And it's you're doing like a different thing every week, and it's like really exciting to encounter all this new stuff.
Sure.
And so I thought like social media might be a better place to do that, but you end up having the opposite problem, which is everything's so superficial. No one's there's not very much depth. You can do research, but if you do a lot of research, it takes forever to make the video. I'm not on about a 1 main channel video per year schedule, which is not. It's certainly not sustainable for someone who's trying to get big on social media. That will never get you there.
Yeah.
I can do it because I spent 10 years getting to the point that I can get away with it.
Yeah, you can take basically a research sabbatical,
and
then you produce like the book or the video.
Yeah, that's basically what I do. But yeah, that is not
sabbatical. So she is a pro-Zionist shill. I knew it.
That's not going to make you a TikTok star. Like that's not,
Yeah.
And I used to do much smaller, lower ambition videos, which is how I kind of built the following in the first place.
Yeah, but you have to kind of like mature in your creative practice, and then also just the world changed a lot.
It changed a
in
lot.
that time.
Yeah,
so,
completely.
Yeah, I had this like we've got so in addition to the podcast, I run a arts nonprofit. And we have an educational wing for that. And Tommy, who runs the courses over there, was saying that this whole syllabus, like all this material, is kind of like around the Mark Fisher slow cancellation of the future, like capitalist realism, and like that, like we're in the new world now. Like Trump broke neoliberalism. Like we actually know what comes after, and and it's like something worse. It's multipolar, it's imperial, whatever, mercantilism. But yeah, the way that the world transformed and your maturation in your creative career, you have to kind of like tackle this new thing in a different way. And I don't think that there's, at least in my survey of the space, I haven't seen someone who's producing like short 20-minute kind of interesting, useful commentary on it. It's more like this long form, almost documentary video essay format that you're doing at the stage.
Well, no, that's really true. I think a lot of the way that I feel like my content has changed over the last 6 years in particular has to do with...
Queen alert. Hold on.
Ethical campaign.
What do you make of Republicans saying that Virginia, you guys getting
Wow.
totally unconstitutional and wrong?
Democrats have attempted and asked Republicans for 10 years to ban partisan gerrymandering. And for 10 years, Republicans have said no. Republicans have fought for partisan gerrymanders across the United States of America, and these are the rules that they have set. And so if the Republican Party wanted to start this, they did this in North Carolina. They drew out 3 Democratic members of Congress in North Carolina. They drew out in Texas. They redid Texas. What they're just mad at is that they have been accustomed to a Democratic Party that rolls over, doesn't fight, and takes everything sitting down. And what they're mad at right now is that we are here in a new day. And we have been asking the Democratic Party to stand up and fight, and now they did, and now the Republican Party doesn't like the fact that they are fighting against someone who actually will stand up for the American people. So if Republicans decide that they would like to revisit a ban on partisan gerrymandering, I welcome them. We have the bill right here to end this all today, but they don't want to because they like pursuing and continuing to enact an unfair electoral landscape. And so we have an obligation to defend ourselves. Thank you. What were you talking about around ethical campaign?
Got him.
Well, I used to have a very progressive idea of the arc of history, and I think that's the product of the first election I voted in was 2008. Obama winning that year. I mean, now Obama has lost so much reputation among people on the left that it's hard to explain how it felt in 2008.
I remember that.
But it was 15s that were on Mamdani's.
People were partying in the street.
They were partying in the street, and it felt like I think of that Connor S. Thompson line about how it felt to be in the summer of '68 or whatever, and it was this inevitable sense of good triumphing over evil, and that racism was over, and now we were just gonna live.
That worked out great.
And then 2016 happened, and it was possible to sort of I think I had all kinds of cope for that and all kinds of explanations of why it wasn't actually that bad, and there's all kinds of reasons I can imagine people voting for Donald Trump. Maybe they just uniquely hated Hillary, as many people said they did. Maybe they just wanted to try something new and anti-establishment and all this. But then when they re-elected him last 2 years ago,
that was something different.
That kind of crushed my idea that things were going to get better, and I now have a more
So when you say the progressive arc to history, you're not talking about a multiple centuries teleological development or arc of feudalism, capitalism, socialism. You're talking about the recent social history of generally people are becoming more progressive, and we'll get Obama, and then we'll get someone else who's more socially progressive.
I think that's what I was thinking. Right?
I assumed the same thing. I think that was a plausible, reasonable thing to think at that time.
And it was kind of an unconscious assumption. I think I don't think I would explicitly have stated, we're definitely getting more progressive, politics from here on out. But I think I felt it that this Trump thing was a kind of bizarre aberration. It was going to go away, and it's not. So that has kind of forced me to reconsider things. It also reconsiders the content I kind of make. I don't really do a de-radicalization so much anymore.
I got a whole page on this.
We're gonna do
Okay, I've got a good one to throw at you.
Okay,
so we were talking about a general kind of social progressivism that's happening over the last few decades, and when we're younger, Obama gets elected, and we think it's going to be this way forever on this kind of constant arc of general social progress. Trump happens, that's a big interruption. However, we have this very weird postmodern conservatism now where Kristi Noem's husband is hyper-conservative, but also dabbling in some, shall we say, unusual habits and behaviors in private.
Well, Republican cross-dressing scandals are not the most novel thing. I don't know, in the Bush era, I kind of remember Larry Flint and the wide stance in the bathroom. He was cruising airport bathrooms, basically. So that's not necessarily a novelty. I think there is somehow the absurdity of the cosmos seems to have
I appreciated the energy between you and Vadim on election night in 2024. Generally helped to cope with the results. No problem.
The kind of the notion that it wasn't just he wasn't just cruising. There's ridiculous details balloon breasts and bimboification and hypnosis and God knows what else we already know about. But
what don't we know?
I'm sure there's an oceanic depth to the
I was thinking, where would you hide a pair of fake tits that big in your house? She's got to know about it.
Maybe inflates them. Well, I think that probably she probably knows. I think that if you're married to someone for decades and they are habitual cross-dresser, there are usually indications that that's going on, and so I'm a little skeptical. But also, fascinatingly, that scandal in particular kind of fascinatingly makes you think on the right's relationship to bimboification in general. A lot of people have observed that what people call it Mar-a-Lago phase. But there is a kind of fixation on this particular type of presentation of femininity, of like a very topiary approach to like female, gender expression. That I mean, people always used to talk about this like Fox News bombshells or whatever. But I think how much work has Kristi Noem done? And people comment on this a lot. This that she's a grandma and she's like kind of like turned herself into a Barbie.
I've heard from people that one of the reasons why fascism is so fixated on aesthetics, like I think of that image of her with this $50,000 watch in front of this backdrop of like all of these prisoners. It's an incredibly powerful image, right? And also these like giant breasts are a really striking image. But fascism is so focused on aesthetics because that's all that they have to offer. Like they don't have a comprehensive, like compelling offer for political economy, so they can just give you these like incredibly potent images.
Well, they sort of don't believe in. I'm trying to say they almost don't believe in reality. Like
yes,
they don't. Like
we should
they
explain
don't
what we mean.
Believe in material reality, but they also sort of think that like the problem. I mean, a lot of the right wing or the fascist, particularly diagnosis of what is wrong with the world is aesthetic, right? The West has fallen. Why? Because of like degeneracy, and the evidence of that is often like suggest like look at modern architecture compared to a cathedral.
Right.
How did this happen, Western man? Right. But I do think that what they're interested in is there's like these like famous ridiculous meme posts. We used to be a proper country. Like and the image attached to that caption is a 7-Eleven ad from the 1970s. So it's like
really
yeah. It's like we used to be like look at this advertising image from 3 decades ago.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be better if we were still like that? And it is very like again this is not like we're not talking they're not giving us data about like wages or about inequality or about
used to be a proper country. Right, wages and productivity were aligned.
Right. But well, I don't know. But you sometimes see like people point like, oh, before 1971, like the inflation has increased so much and wages have not kept up. Like that's like a data point that sort of corresponds to something that is involved in reality. Whereas pointing to advertising from the past and being like, it's sad how commercialized Coca-Cola has become. What are you talking about? Like it's just like a fantasy like that they're engaged in, right?
That like an ad agency dreamed up on Madison Avenue that these people like posit as their vision of the utopian future.
I mean, and the idea of fascism as the aestheticization of politics. I mean, isn't that like Benjamin or someone like communists have been saying since like the 30s?
Speaking of taste, okay, I'll throw you a few. We'll clear the trash mobs here. Let's talk about your recent video. Speaking of bad taste, you recently watched all 10 Saw videos
many times,
and spent several hours writing about it, thinking about it. Why did you choose Saw?
Well, I was procrastinating a few years.
Because it's the best franchise of all time.
To go on another video, and I procrastinated by watching the Saw movies, and it struck me as like really. I was like, there's ideas here that I have not really seen, like been given like the philosophical escalation treatment, and I think it was that combined with the fact that this movie had once traumatized me that I think interested me. Right. Is that well, it's a very Freudian idea that like there's something kind of sadistic or say inherently sadomasochistic about like morality itself, about the psychology of morality. Right. I mean, it's something that really gets neglected in philosophical ethics, where I guess this is kind of my beef with philosophy in general, is that philosophical ethics tries to rationalize ethics, morality, and turn it into like in like the Kantian tradition, you turn it into reason, or to derive all of ethics from laws of reason.
Right.
And I think this is like very clever, it's very smart, it's very impressive. I could not have come up with it, but I also think it's completely wrong. Like, or at least it's completely alien from the way actual ethical thinking happens in situations that matter.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Like I don't think that I mean the categorical imperative, Kant's like ethical maxim, a fancy sort of a fancy golden rule for those who don't study Kant. Like this is a game. It's like a game that's being played by this German intellectual who never left his hometown in the 18th century. That's not how ethical reasoning works. Like I think what I think is much more close to Freud based on my observation of the way people actually engage with ethical questions. It's about it's emotional, right? I mean, and there's
it's kind of cringe to listen to her try to bring up like Kant and categorical imperatives when the other lady did it so much better to justify why we should be shoplifting from Whole Foods in order to bring down the capitalist evil overlords. Just in my personal opinion.
Philosophers who have suggested that ethics is derived from emotions is called emotivism, and it's like a lot of like British empiricists said that, for example. But those people don't really have a lot of insight into emotion either. Whereas I think psychoanalysis kind of does. So like Freud and Civilization and Discontents, for example, talks about like guilt as this like modern neurosis that's the product of kind of repressed aggression, basically. Or aggression is turned inward. And when you sort of internalize the law, what is the law? It's like a punishing sort of tyrannical father that's inside your own head.
Superego.
So superego. So there's a masochism or sadism to morality. I felt that Saw really kind of in an exaggerated way sort of dramatizes that sadism, right? In that, Jigsaw, sort of cartoonish fictional serial killer, is putting people in traps, torture scenarios, basically, that sort of ironically punish some crime, right? So like the maze of razor wire as punishment for self-harming with a razor, right? Like you have to cut yourself to... I mean, it's kind of the same logic of self-harm in the first place, right? So you have to cut yourself to sort of purge the guilt for your crime. Not all self-harm is a complicated psychological topic, but I think there's some version of self-harm or some version of, for example, anorexia that involves a kind of sadistic superego, I guess, in the sense that you're sort of punishing yourself or disciplining yourself for, I mean, in the case of anorexia, it's sort of an aesthetic sin.
I'm thinking of bodybuilding.
Or moral. Bodybuilding is exactly the same.
Physical discipline.
Yeah, physical discipline.
So, restricting your food while cutting.
I wanted to talk about Saw because I see it as sort of like a parody of this entire way of thinking, but a parody that has the ability to sort of like illuminate like what's actually going on in moral psychology a lot of the time. and it sort of notices the aggression and sadism that I think sort of underlies a lot of moral judgment.
There's an interesting phrase I wasn't familiar with before called contrapasso. What is contrapasso?
Contrapasso is an Italian word used by Dante in the Inferno that refers to, well, literally in Italian, I guess it means something like counter suffering, to suffer the opposite of the sin. So I guess it's first introduced by a character who is a politician who has divided a family, divided his son against his father, and his punishment in hell is to carry his own severed head around. So he sort of metaphorically has decapitated a family, and the punishment is literal decapitation. So there's a kind of symmetry between crime and punishment, and a lot of saw traps are like this. And I think it also speaks to something about feelings about justice, right? That a crime, I mean, we often feel like crime should be sort of punished in proportion to the harm caused to victims.
Right.
Or we feel that in some way the punishment should, if not be proportionate to, sort of resemble the crime. And it's called poetic justice for this reason, right? There's a rhyming quality to the relation between crime and punishment.
Well, death penalty for committing murder,
the death
for
penalty
example.
for committing murder, right? And I think a lot of people do have a kind of profound sense of it's sort of unjust if someone is a serial killer, for example, and then they merely get life in prison, right? It's like, well, the debt incurred by the crime has not been repaid because you cannot pay for with jail time for. I mean, I would argue that like incarceration is fairly cruel.
It's a punishment already.
Yeah. And so there's kind of like a fake humanitarian element, I think, to like life incarceration. And so it's frustrating both to the humanitarians and to the people who want symmetrical retribution, right? Because I think to the humanitarians, incarceration is like sort of a bloodless punishment.
Sure.
That
it's non-violent.
Is non-violent, sort of, in the sense that like, but I think it also like has a lot more to do with. I mean, you can look at the way that Americans administer the death penalty. We're the same kind of priorities. The priority is not really reducing pain because the way that lethal injection is done is very painful a lot of the time. Or things like the electric chair, like the deeply painful ways to kind of torture someone to death. But it's actually, I mean, it's worse than the guillotine, except for maybe the psychology of the guillotine, which is I think intimidating. The idea of being beheaded.
No, they want to see the person suffer, right?
Right. But I think that like the humanitarian, like liberal humanist, whatever word I'm using for this, you know what I mean? Sensibility is like, well, there's something barbaric or inhumane about public execution, and especially about execution involving blood. And the anxiety, I think, seems to really center around the guilt of the executioner or the people witnessing the execution or the judge. It's not necessarily about being humane towards the victim. But I also think that at the same time, it frustrates the more like draconian wish for proportionate retribution.
I want to touch on this topic of law as the foundation of society and these kind of like early liberal thinkers. But a few particular examples that jumped out to me. I believe it's Saw 6. You'll know this better than I do, but the insurance executive has to choose between who lives and who dies. And that was, I don't know how many more years before Luigi, but like there's a kind of clear allegory for what is going on now.
Well, I guess I'm a little off the topic of law, but to just dwell on the Luigi point, like I think that the popularity of Luigi is an expression of a kind of popular frustration with the law. Although, I mean, in this case, the law is not going to punish a health insurance CEO, right? So I think there's a wish for someone else to do it.
It even rewards them by making a lot of money.
For sure, yeah. So there's a sense of like that injustice that sort of lingers over us all every day in society. That's the appeal of the vigilante, is that the vigilante like reclaims the ability to punish from a legal system that has a monopoly on violent punishment. And I think in some ways it also comes from the lack of things like public executions where there's popular sort of participation, at least as spectators, in this kind of people come together to attack a guilty person. I think also social media kind of works this way too. Like, I mean, way too much has been said about cancel mobs or whatever on Twitter, but I do think that it tells a similar.
It's an execution in the public square.
Well, it's kind of public execution.
It's
a digital execution. And
drawn and quartered on social media.
I think sometimes you could categorize this as justice. Sometimes it's almost closer to like human sacrifice, which as a French philosopher René Girard talks about.
I'm familiar.
Scapegoating, and that's this like very central like facet of religious life, where like most major religions in the ancient world practiced either animal or human sacrifice, and then over time that has kind of declined, in part as religion internalizes that type of aggression, right? So in Christianity, Jesus is a human sacrifice. He is. It's not an ongoing sacrifice of living people, but that's supposed to be a kind of substitute sacrifice.
No, we reenact it every week.
We reenact it every week. Yeah. And that sort of all our sins or all the kind of maybe aggression we feel towards other people gets displaced onto the sacrificial lamb. And that theoretically would sort of reduce the need for, well, it's supposed to do what human sacrifice used to do, which is increase social cohesion by displacing intra-community aggression and rivalry onto a scapegoat, right?
Is there also a part of it where it's like the demonstrate?
Real talk, do you think we're ever going to find out more about CK and Trump's Minecraft attempt? Oh, the guy that tried to kill him or whatever? I have no clue. Are we done with that? Is there anything even being investigated about that guy?
Of the society's values, like why did they do like executions in the public square, for example, was because it had to be made visible to a bunch of people?
Yeah, for sure. Like it is, I think, a clarification of a moral order. Ritual usually is some form of that, right? And I think public execution is a version of that. I mean, I also think with public execution, in the case of like a monarch, I mean, like Foucault has a thing about this, how like the extremely disproportionate or asymmetrical execution of a regicide, for example, in part is disproportionate in terms of like the guy tries to stab the king and he's like drawn and quartered and his like body parts are burnt and hung up on the rafters or whatever. That's a demonstration of almost sort of like godlike power of the king to the showcasing his power is by how disproportionate the retaliation is.
Your scapegoating narrative, that was from the conspiracy video, is that correct? You take these interesting like tangents where you're doing a long form video essay and then you'll spend like 20 minutes on a certain topic that's kind of a side quest. Links back in an interesting way. In the most recent video about Saw, there's a segment about Quentin Tarantino know, everyone's favorite director. And I think you say something like, I'm paraphrasing here, but victimhood narratives allow us to enjoy violence. And so looking at his films like Django Unchained or what was Inglourious Basterds, the Nazi movie, is there anything in the news right now that made you think of this theme or specific political positions Quentin Tarantino may have taken recently?
Well, yes. I mean, I think that I quite a lot of different things, but I think that, I mean, my first experience with this growing up very vividly was 9/11, where let's ignore what caused 9/11 for a moment. I mean, we can come back to that. But I think for a lot of Americans, 9/11 was experienced as this like horrifying, humiliating trauma that like cried out for revenge. And so like I think the war in Afghanistan was sort of inevitable as a result of that, but it turned out to be that the administration was not good at tracking down Osama bin Laden. And even just tracking him down felt not adequate to the scope of damage that was being avenged. So I think that in a lot of ways, the popular support for the war in Iraq was basically a displaced revenge for 9/11.
People forget how popular that shit was.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's an impressive level of amnesia, actually.
Yeah.
That, like, you know, you had, like, Michael Moore being booed in Hollywood for his opposition to the war. It's hard to imagine, like, today that liberals were basically also down with this.
I got bullied in high school. Now that I was repressed, I got bullied in high school for being against the war. I wasn't patriotic enough.
I did too. Yeah.
You fuck these people. We were right the whole time.
Do you hate the troops? Like, that's what they would say. Like, if you were against the war, you hated the troops, and they couldn't conceive of a reason to be against the war that wasn't just, like, you have contempt for American soldiers. Right? So, that was, like, kind of my political awakening. Now, I think the same thing happened. Well, I won't say the same thing because there's obviously a lot of, you know, we go into specific differences. But I saw a similar dynamic after October 7th, when, at least in the initial stages, it seemed like fairly transparent that Israel was out for blood. I mean, it was immediately obvious. Just from the tone that Netanyahu, for example, adopted shamelessly on social media. I mean, I think that his tone was like, I don't know if I can think of a better word than genocidal. The week after October 7th, I think anyone who's analyzed his rhetoric could see what was coming at that point.
Definitely,
I actually don't know the details of Tarantino's positions on this, but I think I think
he posted from a bomb shelter in Tel Aviv.
Yeah, he's more or less a supporter of.
Oh, was a huge supporter.
Of the ethnic cleansing in Gaza.
And I mean, in your, I'm kind of summarizing what you say in the video, but there's this kind of progression in his own work where towards the end of it, he realizes that you can use this victimhood narrative to just enjoy the violence that, if you look at his early...
Wait, what is this? You should familiarize yourself with this dude, possibly the highest profile MAGA guy on Twitter, who is this shamelessly unprincipled. He's that CJ Pearson guy on steroids. Who is Christian Hine? Is he on media anywhere, or... I support gerrymandering when my side does it, and I oppose it when Democrats do it because Democrats are my enemy and I want them to lose everywhere. The Democratic Party masquerades as a legitimate political party while functioning as an illegitimate tool for foreigners, criminals, and their managerial handlers to sack and pillage this country at the expense of the American people. The appropriate number of Democratic seats at all levels of government is 0. The party itself should be banned, and at least half of its elected officials should be in prison. I don't know. I think this position is kind of base. At least he's honest about it, as opposed to Republicans who pretend that they have some semblance of fairness around how they organize. This guy's one of the biggest Twitter MAGA posters. Gotcha.
Stuff he was just enjoying that anyway.
Yeah.
And it seems like a kind of perfect fit for his real-world politics right now.
The kind of moral idea of what constitutes justified violence has shifted over time, and I think...
how much time? Like, are we talking World War II to now, or
like 100 years?
100 years, okay.
But good question. I should be specific. Well, I think that, like, I mean, you see people on the left do this, of course, but you also see Israel doing this, right? It's their sense of victimhood that warrants the violence, that makes the violence justified, right? And I think that, I mean, it's really not just the left. It really is like the far right also does this, like this kind of constant sense of we are the besieged, aggrieved victims, and we are fighting back against some kind of oppressive thing, right? That's what makes violence good. I think it seems to have taken Tarantino a while as a filmmaker to figure out how to use that to produce like violence as pleasure, right? The pleasure of violence in his movies, which has always been his main interest. But I guess in the video I talk about his earliest film as a director, Reservoir Dogs, which is about criminality, and criminal violence. And that violence is also kind of presented as fun, but in a more ambivalent way, right? Where the famous scene with Mr. Blanche portraying a cop, there's something fun about it. In the way there's something fun about the portrayal of sexual violence in A Clockwork Orange, right? It's like this amplified sort of musical, ecstatic, joyous, like sadism. And that's really uncomfortable, I think, for most viewers to watch. It's uncomfortable for me to watch.
Definitely.
Because I don't want to feel good about criminal sadism. But then I also feel that the kind of feel good violence of a revenge movie, or the feel good violence of a kind of social justice revenge movie, which is what I take Django Unchained and Inglourious Basterds to be. I mean, I think it shows that like this is what it takes to make people feel that violence is justified, or to celebrate violence. So I think that's certainly like an important part of the mindset of the IDF and of Kahanism, or what do you want to call it in general. The idea of like, look, Jews have been victimized for 2,000 years. We'll always be victimized. We'll always be besieged. We'll always be hated. And the only way for us to survive is to fight back. That's how they think, right? And that's why all of this seems justified.
Do you agree earlier with the implication that the re-election of Trump indicates a departure from the liberal trend of recent history? A bit. The second time was a pretty big what the fuck moment. For Trump to be so blatantly anti-liberal, like anti-liberalism, and to still get elected is pretty wild.
Now I have this other worry, and this is where I've caused myself to become an arch villain of the online left recently, is I also worry that there'll be a backlash to that as well.
A backlash to what?
Well, a backlash to the visible spectacle of Israel's ethnic cleansing, which kind of, I think, has led many people to have an almost obsessive fixation on Israel and Zionism as like the great Satan, right? Which maybe I'm overactive in my anxiety about it, but maybe I'm not. I mean, I think that some people are going to want to retaliate. for the hundreds of videos they've seen of children being blown up. That sort of worries me, not just for the victims of the retaliation, but for the continued escalation of violence that it implies. I don't have an answer. I don't know what to do about it. It's just a thing I'm watching like a train wreck. In the same way that I think on October 7th, when that news came in, of course I was horrified by the attack itself and the victims of the attack, but also was overwhelmed by fear of what Israel was going to do next, which would likely be worse. Is how I felt at the time. It has been. Yeah.
My problem with doing the show is that the topics that interest me are all of the most thorny topics that the online left gets extremely aggravated by. So that is kind of the only thing that I want to talk about. And in that post that you're talking about, it was an Instagram story or whatever, this thing that's circulated on Reddit and other sites, you talk about the left embracing hopeless causes. And maybe we'll talk about this behind the paywall, because I think this is actually an incredibly important insight. But if you are engaged in politics to assume a moral high ground, but not to win material victories in the world, you intentionally choose topics by which you have no lever of power to change their outcome. And that has made it, if you put together the psychological profile of the online leftist, this is kind of the perfect trap for them, because there's no lever they can pull in American politics, either through strike, either through democratic inputs. Like they don't have a hand in it. The most they can do is like lay in front of the tanks. I don't see a lot of people doing that.
People aren't doing that.
Some are, but not a lot of people. But what is the thing that draws this online left audience to embrace causes that they cannot have a say in its outcome?
I spent a lot of time thinking about exactly that question, because I think a lot of things go into it. I think one is a kind of people's identity becomes oppositional. Like when you identify yourself as a radical, you think of yourself as anti-establishment. That is who you are. That is the basis of all of your moral principles, which sort of also implies that you don't want to be the establishment, or you don't want to even be associated with the establishment. So one thing I got very frustrated with people self-styled radicals is that even when the left does have victories, the victories then immediately spun into some kind of disappointment.
They don't actually want to be in power.
They don't want to be in power. So like, I mean, you've seen it also already with like, well, we saw it with AOC and with Bernie Sanders, where like I feel like those people were the sort of champions of the left 8 years ago, and now like, oh my God, like I saw like when your wonderful mayor Zoran Mamdani got elected, like he posted some picture of him with Bernie Sanders and AOC, and immediately like the faction of the online left that I'm discussing here, the reaction was like, wow, like I can't believe Zoran Mamdani would associate with these like genocidal Zionists.
Wow.
Right? And it's like, well, what did you expect him to do as an elected politician?
Have
not
no
ever
allies?
talk to any other politician? Like that's not how this works. I mean, in some ways, like what they are horrified by is participation in politics itself. Because that means a kind of compromise of their virtue ethics. And
wait, mean break?
What he's saying is, look, it's true, Virginia's about 50-50 Democrats, Republicans, but we need to stop the Republicans, so we're going to disenfranchise the Republicans. That's what he's saying. And he's using a few more words to say it, but he's being basically honest about the argument. Democracy is when half the voters have no power whatsoever. That's democracy is when I win. That's what he's saying. He is doing the thing that he is accusing Trump of doing. And his chief evidence is the January 6th political mob, the worst event in the history of this or any republic. January 6th, which we are learning from the SPLC indictment, seems at least quite likely.
It really was Antifa.
To have been put on by the left as well. Exacerbated, funded, promoted. We know that the FBI was there under Joe Biden, or just before the entry of Joe Biden, but a lot of careerists there.
All under Trump's government, by the way. Crazy how that happened.
And I find it so preposterous because a lot of these people also are claiming to be Marxists. But like, so you would think Marxism is like based on some kind of understanding of like, material conditions, but they're virtue ethicists. They're virtue ethicists slurping as Marxists.
They're not materialists by any stretch of the imagination.
And it's very frustrating.
Yeah, if they, not to harp on this, but like if they ever got into the position of power, it would mean the death of that subcultural identity, which is actually their primary drive.
So it's a kind of political like hipsterism in the sense of like, you like the band until it's popular. And then you can't like it anymore because the popularity of it is incompatible with your self-image of someone who's on outside of the mainstream, right?
I like that quite a bit. On the topic of the left-wing mindset, there is quite a discussion in the Saw movie, or in your video essay on the Saw movies, about a right-wing mindset that uses violence as retribution. What is the connection between this right-wing mindset and visible violence as retribution?
Well, I see the right-wing mindset, and my influence here is a cognitive linguist, George Lakoff, who wrote this book called Moral Politics, where he argues that basically the understanding of the family and the role of parents is the microcosm of how people view politics as a macrocosm. In other words, that how a family authority structure works is the basis for how people with different values see politics. So this book's from the 90s, but I think it still works remarkably.
Like the father as disciplinarian?
Yeah, so the right-wing politics, he calls it strict father morality, and it's the idea is, of a disciplinarian father. Daddy's coming home, and he's eating his Zolotov, right? And that is, the way that people talk about Trump on the right is like, you don't have to be Freud to notice that, because they just say it. They call him daddy.
Yeah, they post memes about
it. And I think that he refers to the liberal value system as nurturant parent morality. So the idea is that like the role of a parent or of a government is to nurture, to be compassionate, to provide, to
the social democratic welfare state.
Social democratic welfare state. Well, the social democratic welfare state is mommy politics.
The nanny state.
Yeah, it's a nanny state, mommy state in a way, right? And like Lakoff, he wants to insist that, of course, like men can be the nurturer as well. But I think it retains its gendered coding, right? And I think a lot of the way that you see people respond very differently to the Democratic Party as opposed to the Republican Party has to do with the way that like the Republican Party is kind of their daddy, and so the expectations of how they're supposed to act are sort of daddy expectations. Again, we're assuming sort of somewhat traditional conservative family model. So I think that like when Trump does authoritarian things or like cruel things or disciplinarian things, no one's surprised. Maybe people aren't even offended because it's sort of like, well, that's what he's supposed to do. But I think the sort of moral bar is much higher for liberals because liberals are supposed to be mommy. And if mommy is not taking care of me, she's failing.
Do you? What's your thought on this book? Do you agree with his thesis?
I think it's for them. I think for the most part, I do agree with it.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's like certain details I think I would question. Like, this I think feels out of date to me. There's a period where he analyzes the like Bill Clinton, Monica Lewinsky scandal, and he suggests that like the Republican like horror with which they regard this has to do with sexual morality being tightly controlled under daddy politics. Where I'm not sure that's true because of the way that Donald Trump's like sexual libertinism is completely disregarded on the right.
Right.
And so I think there's actually something like the divine right of kings at play almost, where like Trump is so high a daddy that like the law does not apply to him.
That's
right. In fact, it's partly his ability to transgress the law that gives him his power.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that he makes a law, but he doesn't follow the law.
That's real power.
Yeah, that's real power. I mean, it's like incest among the pharaohs or whatever, right? Like
the morality and the law does not apply to you. For above it might makes right. The most expedient way.
Right.
Let me ask you though so this framing of like the father as retribution, the punishing disciplinarian father, that's the kind of masculine interpretation of politics, and then the nurturing mother, which is the social democratic welfare state. This is my own hobby horse, but I cannot get past the idea that at the heyday of social democracy, like men were, predominant in the labor force. We had these masculine jobs where people worked in, things that were heavy. You had to sell your muscle power.
Yeah.
So how do we square this like philosophical interpretation that social democracy is feminine if like the back of labor upon which it was built was like guys lifting heavy stuff on an assembly line?
Yes. Well, I think that it has to do with because I think that the nurturant parent politics is not inherently feminine in and of itself. It specifically has to do with the role of the state, which is sort of feminine. I would have to think more about like the sort of like masculine connotations of labor movements and how that squares with mommy politics, nurturant parent morality. I mean, it's an interesting question because I do think that there are people on the left who are doing some like different. They're doing some version of daddy politics. I think actually.
Who would those people be?
There's people who I feel have an implicit preference for a sort of strong masculine leader. I mean, you see this with like say like Stalinists. I don't know how many Stalinists we really have. I don't know how big of a problem this is. I think it's more of a problem than it used to be, actually. But I think that part of the appeal of, I mean, like, okay, it's like this is such a fringe organization. I don't know if I even want to give it the attention. But like,
I'll bleep it. I knew who you're going to bring up.
Yeah. Like
these people are desperately trying to get on the show.
That is left.
Like I get every week I get something from them. Yeah.
I would consider that left daddy politics.
Yeah. Is it left? Is it something?
Well, we could argue it's not left, right? It's populist.
Right.
Populist is not the same as left.
Yeah.
It's not the left that I want anything to do
with.
Yeah. But they are. I mean, I guess people call it like red-brown alliance or something.
True.
But yeah, I mean, I think to be mommy politics, you also kind of have to admit at least some level of feminism, which I don't think they do. But I also think that, like, I don't know, even more mainstream right political commentary, I feel like the audience is often men.
Yes,
right?
Overwhelmingly,
yeah. And I think that there's a gendered element to the kinds of, well, let's take, for example, like what has become a big part of political discourse on the left is this kind of constant tribal infighting of libs versus leftists, right? Or liberals versus leftists, which, okay, you can define that in philosophical terms, like where like liberalism is in the tradition of John Locke and John Rawls, and it believes in rights and this kind of stuff, whereas leftism is in the tradition of Karl Marx and it believes in abolishing capitalism.
Yes.
Okay, we all know that. But like in practice, what it is in online spaces is tribal affiliation.
Yes.
Right. Like I guess I've recently been vocal about characterizing myself as lib, more or less embracing like a thing that people have used as a slur for me for years. But I think I think that when I say I'm a lib, I'm really talking about tribal affiliation, meaning that I am passionate about voting for Democrats in presidential elections. That seems to be the main point of contention that I have with the more explicitly leftist, not liberal tribe, where, and I guess I find the leftist, not liberal tribe, it's not exclusively male. But I think it does lean masculine. And whereas the Democratic Party is, like women are kind of the backbone of the Democratic Party. And I think people sense that. I think a lot of it's especially difficult with young men, because I think a lot of young men are horrified by the possibility of belonging to a coalition wide enough to include their mother. Like, I mean, I do think that's part of it, right? Like, it's like it's seen as so like cringe and chuggy, or whatever word we're using now. I don't think men ever said chuggy, but there's like 2 years where Gen Z women said it, and then the New York Times wrote an article about it, and then that killed it. But it's not the whole like radical chic thing is like tarnished when your mom in her minivan shows up.
Sure.
And I think that people like Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris sort of remind you of your mom, and it's just like, oh, I don't want to. I mean, that's like the feeling I get from talking to a lot of like young men about politics.
Because they scold.
Yeah, right. It's seen as a scolding. Yeah,
right.
And
that's the flip side of the mommy state.
Right. Is that the authoritarian woman or the authoritative woman? Not even authoritarian. Woman in authority is seen as maternal and therefore threatening to men who have not resolved that conflict with the sort of looming figure of their mother. And so I think that a guy like Hassan is appealing because he's like manly. you know, and he, I think, scratches an itch for a lot of young men that's not dissimilar to what the more right-wing sinister manosphere influencers
They want to be attractive and muscular and successful.
And they want a daddy to tell them how to be a man. So I think, you know, I don't really participate in this. I'm an outsider to this. But I do think there's like a little bit of a gender war that kind of underlies some of this like lib-left dispute where, again, there's like a lot of people who are passionate supporters of the Democratic Party, like their issues are things like abortion and things that, I know no one talks about that anymore, but you know,
that disappeared.
It vanished along with the environment.
We're working our way up. We got
a
few important things on the docket.
But I do think that, I don't know, I do get frustrated by it, I admit. I mean, I realize I'm speaking before a hypothetical, probably largely male audience here.
Probably like 80% male.
Probably 80%, yeah. But like I don't disparage the idea that it's important to communicate to men, or that, you know, male loneliness, for example, is something important to consider, or that the Democratic Party even needs to consider how it attracts men, since it doesn't seem to struggle with attracting women. But I admit that, like, for whatever the people listening, I do think that I get frustrated sometimes by, are women lonely? Like, I don't know. No one asked. No one cares. Like, I find that the idea that like men are the people who matter to be sort of like this like underlying insult that gets sort of tedious. I'm sure I'm not the only one who feels this way, but I feel like it's hard to voice that without making men feel threatened, since they already feel so intimidated by the kind of oppressive mommy Democratic Party.
This is a little bit in the weeds, but I'm not going to recall the numbers off the top of my head, so people can fact check me in the comments if I'm wrong about this. But young men swing like 11 points towards the Republican Party in 2024. That spurs this whole like media arc of talking about the political sentiments of young men, how to influence them, the podcast election, all of this other stuff. I've got a ton of questions about that. We'll get to in a moment. But if you look at the swing in the same age bracket, I forget exactly what it is, like 18 to 24 or something like that, young women swing like 6 or 7 points. So it's actually a pretty marginal difference. And so my thought was that rather than construing, well, one, most importantly, you have the working class that swung towards the Republicans, and then you have young people that are being proletarianized at a faster rate than people who are older than them. And so the actual narrative, what the data indicates, is that the working class is voting for the right-wing nationalist parties. And then young people, particularly men, but also women, are shifting incrementally in that direction. And so the media narrative around winning the hearts and minds of young men was a way to kind of like ignore the labor question, which is actually the fundamental driver of this anomaly. That's my own hobby horse to bring to this thing. But I think it's a fair question to ask, like, are young women lonely as well? There may be some statistics at which young men are more atomized. If you look at like dating app statistics and things like this, and 18 to 24 performing less well in the labor market and this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I think for men, like, any losses are intensified by the kind of decades-long sort of loss of gender power.
Their previous position.
Right. So there's a sense of having fallen further, and a sense of like having lost power and having lost, lost like women's dependence on them. I think adds an extra level of like sting, I think, to the kind of lowered economic status.
Let me take us down this path. I want to ask a few questions as we wrap up this discussion about your recent video. I think these are thematically related. But the rise of Trump, this kind of end of a broad arc of social progressivism, this right-wing mindset that you talk about in the video, one of the things that has come up on the show, conversations with different people, is generally what percentage of society has this right-wing mindset? Kyle Kalinske will tell me that 30% of society is fascist. What is your estimation? How many people in our society have this right-wing mindset?
Well, I think that on the edges, there's a little bit of a kind of gradient. I would agree with 30% as like
really
maybe 25% are like dyed in the wool, like unreachable levels of right-wing mindset.
I'm like 10 to 15.
Okay,
but I've heard people say 50.
I mean, I think there's maybe like 20 or 30% of people who kind of are swayable in one direction or the other. Because I mean, so if we use my oversimplification of mommy politics and daddy politics, well, most people I think do believe in both to some extent, right? I mean, even in right-wing daddy politics, it's not that there's no room for a parent to be nurturing. Often that's sort of disproportionately viewed as the woman's role, whereas the father's role might be more disciplining and protecting. And then it's not that like mommy politics doesn't think that protecting and disciplining have their place as well. So I think that to suggest that this is a complete binary, that people either believe one or the other, that's wrong, right? But I think that the further right you go, the more you go into the idea of like the main thing that they want out of a government is to project strength and power and discipline and tough love, right? Let's say, as opposed to
no participation trophies.
Yeah, no participation trophies. Whereas like I think the issues that people tend to go to the left or to the Democratic Party for, things like healthcare was Obama's big issue, for example, which is kind of a mommy.
You think the term lonely when referring to the male-female loneliness epidemic is oversimplifying and kind of driving the bifurcation of those opinions? Because there could be a thirst epidemic where women are in the ocean and men are in the desert, and just referring to it as thirst morally loads it based on which side we're focusing on at the moment. I mean, it's just fuck all that conversation. Gary political conversation. It's just people talking about gender roles is complicated, and there's just a lot that goes into it, and it's a conversation that's I think beyond a lot of people. I just saw some guy in chat earlier. I didn't even comment on it. I don't know where it was, but where was it? A generic fool guy says, "No offense, but most women, almost all I've ever known, can get attention anytime they want to. Meanwhile, many men I know/knew can't even get it, or can't even if they try." Like that, I would say that this is like half of men probably think stuff like this without realizing that like getting attention from somebody because they want to you doesn't mean anything when you've gotten that attention from every single guy since you were age 9. Like it's not like this is like a thing that makes you feel good. Like it's a retarded point to bring up, but I mean like people just it's just all the gender stuff. We need to go back to enslaving women, or men can be enslaved. We can live in that world.
Issue in terms of it being like about nurturing and sort of a soft type of protecting.
This is such an autistic response. That may be a political mistake. It should be about cost savings and government efficiency rather than nurturing. I think that may have been an error on their part. But okay, let me ask you this. So let's say like 30% of society is right wing, 30% is left wing. There's 30% in the middle, right? Roughly thirds, right? And what that kind of means is that the people in that block, like say the MAGA fanatics, for example, or the internet communists, they are unpersuadable. Like they can't be reached by messaging. And so what we're fighting over is this like 1/3 in the middle. I feel like debating the margins on that, the question underneath, there's a risk of naturalizing the political...
What about women seeing hundreds of men match with them on dating apps? That's probably an ego boost. No, it's not.
Leanings and affiliations of people now, whereas compared to the heyday of social democracy in the 1970s, should we also assume that 30% of people were fascists? Because there is like an arc of historical progression and development here, right? There was a kind of rule-based order at one point in global history. The end of history, the kind of prevailing of liberal democracy, in which people would be accountable to this international system of rules. The subtext of what we're talking about and Trump's divine right of kings, like all of this stuff is like, we are now in this period where might makes right. Like Israel's the most pronounced example of this. There's nothing that holds people accountable. And so retribution and kind of the underlying theme of this video, I think, is also like Locke and all the people you mentioned before, like their philosophy is kind of unraveling under just like the brutal, like a kind of like Hobbesian application of strength and military might, like rule by the sword, right? He has some kind of quote of like society can only administer these rules such that it can enforce by the sword. And that's what we're seeing. Like there are basically no more rules that govern this stuff. It is just might makes right. And should we assume that the constituency that elected this guy, were they always in existence previously? Is this something that came into existence, right? In the 50-year arc of, if we're trying to get back to the 1970s political economy, were those people already fascist, or were they made fascist by the development of neoliberalism?
Well, I think that the kind of authoritarian might makes right, I mean, that has become almost like a caricature of itself at this point with, Donald Trump insisting that we're going to war to take their oil and so on. Like things that like, far left critics of the Bush administration would have said that that's what he was doing. But no one in the Bush administration ever would have said, we're going to Iraq to take their oil, right? Like as if this is like piracy, like basically plundering.
Yeah, we were doing it for democracy. Right. That's what they had to say.
These were these ideals. I mean, I think that, going back to the 70s, going back to the Cold War, when I think we got
a new Cold War.
Well, but like the right at the time, I think did sort of have this kind of macho stance about the Soviet Union. But domestically, they were still more, they were much less authoritarian domestically, right? Or there was still a sense of like, I think Lakoff even suggests that during the Cold War, you often got like, there's this period where you had further right presidents and further left Congress, as if like almost like the executive was daddy and the legislative was mommy. And I just think that that tendency of the need to like project constant like strength and power and discipline and menace, I feel that used to have a more specific target that was outside the country. I mean, it was, in Vietnam or in Russia or in, so like that is not necessarily new, right?
Is China a sufficient enemy to have now that coalition could come back into existence?
China is certainly an enemy now, but I do think that one reason for the extent of like enemy within kind of fascist scapegoating and punishing, I think that probably is in some part the result of like the average person's experience of sort of economic loss. Or there's a strong sense of this being like sort of a zero sum, and like my wealth has been taken from me by immigrants, or for example, it's like is a kind of suggestion that is being put forward to justify rounding up immigrants and putting them in alligator Alcatraz, right? Like, so I do think that aspect may well be the result of like Reagan and because I think Reagan started the tendency that has metastasized into what it's become.
That was the coup that transformed the world.
I mean, in some ways that was also, like, in some ways you could say that was a backlash to like 60s counterculture, the moral majority, right? And sort of anxiety also about the collapse of order and the decay of social norms, I think led a lot of, to a religious right revival, for example, in the late 70s and in the 80s. That I think is a kind of predecessor to this. Like the question is, how has it become like so obscene and transgressive? That's the new part for Trump, I think.
Are online politics and real politics becoming the same thing?
Yes. I mean, to a large extent. I mean, I've thought that for a long time. I've thought that since the 2010s. And I think there's like some limits to it in that there does remain like sections of online politics that are very online. As we say, like, I think that unfortunately, a lot of leftist politics doesn't seem to translate into like ballot behavior. I know I'm always harping on this, but like I do think it matters. And if leftist politics becomes basically like a niche subculture of the internet, then I kind of do question the utility of that. Unless it's so like entertaining or intellectually rewarding in its own right that it justifies itself, which maybe it sometimes does. But if you think that you're doing politics, I think it should translate into political action, right? But I do think that it's pretty hard to deny at this point that political commentary that happens online needs to be taken extremely seriously, right? I mean, this does seem to be the main way people get information.
It's a big deal.
It's not,
maybe to just run like the kind of counter argument on the political hipsterdom of the left. Speaking of hipsters, I was thinking about MGMT, for example, of like a band that basically got through in this early period of social media that was like hipster culture, but now it's in like car commercials. I hear it in the grocery store. Is there some type of, just to check our work here, is there some type of left-wing subculture that could be, birthed in the gutter of the internet that actually does have a scalable narrative that could reach the 77 million people we need to convince in a national election?
I think so. I think probably.
It's possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think the people who were there in the original scene would of course reject what it became, but so what?
Right.
Like,
we don't need them anymore. We got everybody else.
Correct. Right. And I mean, I think that is what success would look like.
Yeah.
I think people who have the hipster mindset are allergic to success. They don't want it. But in spite of that, they can still be useful.
Yeah.
Right. If they're able to generate ideas and discourses that are infectious in that way.
If people actually want them. Yeah. On the topic of gaming that we touched on before, were you involved in like internet spaces? I think of the casual racism in World of Warcraft, where like people would say offensive things in Baron's chat, for example.
Yeah.
Did you see those things growing up? Were you familiar with those cultures, and what set off the alarm bells versus what was like a dismissible part of the attention dynamics in a message board thread, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I was never like a huge so all this stuff I kind of experienced in a very like peripheral way. My brothers were big, World of Warcraft players, so I saw it from that. For me, was like drawn into a lot of this by morbid curiosity, like I said. Like that was the appeal of 4chan to me. I never enjoyed 4chan or felt like I wanted to be there, but I would go there because of like I don't know. There's that kind of dark voyeurism that I've always been attracted to. Of like, look at what is going on here. Like the like, or like even the incel subculture has been like fascinating to me. Like I just want to spectate like the dysfunction of it and the cruelty of it is interesting. And also just like, I just kind of love bizarre language, like especially the weird ways that like looks maxers talk, for example. I just like am entranced by this. Like the weird vocabularies is like poetry, deranged poetry. So I feel like I like curate that.
Like negative cancel tilt, this kind of thing?
Yeah. Negative cancel tilt. Just the fixations. That's like, I just think I love that. I mean, I don't love it. They should stop. But while they're doing it, I'm going to at least allow myself to like be entertained by it.
Yeah. This is, I don't know if this is like a personality flaw, but like my instinct with this stuff, like the looks maxing stuff is obviously like in the media in the last few weeks and months. But the posture that I think is important to take on this stuff is like, it's trending for a reason.
Yeah.
Trending for a reason because most people like it. So I feel like it's a failure on our part about messaging if we take this oppositional stance.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of tempted to credit to the Horseshoe Theory podcast. I did an episode about the black pill and looks maxing. But this guy, Henry, who was their intern, gave an incredible performance on this episode, was saying that this black pill looks maxing, hyperfixation on like the degree of your canthal tilt and this kind of shit in your jaw and your masseter muscles and everything else was men realizing what it's like to be a woman for the first time, that they become hyper conscious of their own appearance. And I felt like that's actually a better posture than to be like, well, men shouldn't try to be attractive. They shouldn't try to exercise. Like you should be ugly and out of shape.
Yeah.
And actually that's the left-wing progressive position.
Right. Well, I do feel like some like kind of evil shot in Freud a little bit as seeing like men impose what has been imposed on women, impose it on themselves for seemingly no reason. I don't think it's for no reason. I mean, I think it's the product of technology. Right? I mean, I think everyone's the looks maxing. A woman would never come up with the term looks maxing, but like that is what women have done for centuries, right? Because it's sort of what's expected of women socially. It has not been what's expected of men. But I think the fact that we all carry around phones with a camera in them and that digital culture is so visual and it's so based on image and avatar. Like I think that how many times in a year is like a 22-year-old photographed these days compared to 20 years ago. I mean, it has to be orders of magnitude. Like I think that there's kind of an unprecedented ability to create images of yourself. I think that I've kind of had my own sort of derangements that I've had to overcome a little bit from just the fact of being on camera all the time and like having to look at my own face all the time. It's kind of weird and not normal to have like that much time. But I think that it's been interesting to see men develop their own specific types of neurosis about this. Sometimes, well, and it's gotten to the extreme point of like, well, it's hard to believe in that parody, like the case of like clavicular and smashing your face with a hammer maxing or whatever it is.
Bone mashing.
Bone
smashing, whatever it is.
Bone smashing,
I'm pretty sure that's not real. On the topic of niche internet subculture,
hater, doubter.
In your conspiracy video, which is one of my favorite of your works, you talk briefly about Pizzagate. How are you feeling post Epstein Files release?
A lot of people ask me that. Obviously a lot of people have confronted me with the suggestion that like my conspiracy video had been completely proven wrong by the release of the Epstein Files.
Okay.
I really don't agree with that at all.
I think
shit.
That.
Well, first of all, a lot of Epstein Files were already released and before I made that video. So, but I think that the fact that people see the Epstein Files as a vindication of Pizzagate is like, I feel that it illustrates things I was talking about in that video. So just the fact that like a real conspiracy or real scandals will be continuously and forever overlooked by conspiracy theorists because what drives them is the urge to discover the unknown or the hidden or the secret. That's why the fixation is.
Do you think it's more radical, Hassan or Fuentes? I don't know. These guys are super radical on totally different ends of the political spectrum. I don't even know how you would compare the two.
Secret societies. So
it's a hard one.
What does the Epstein Files reveal? It reveals that a lot of very powerful men do in fact conspire with each other to participate in a kind of sex trafficking, right? Sometimes involving minors. That doesn't surprise me at all. Actually, I mean that's not even slightly surprising to me. I would say I'm a little surprised maybe by how coordinated it is. Like the fact that so many men from so many different I don't know if I want to go into specifics, but like even like someone who was like I used to be involved in like atheist and skeptic communities. Many of the most high profile men, which feminists in those communities have been complaining about for well over a decade, turn out to have had personal correspondences with Jeffrey Epstein. Where they're asking for advice on how to manage these accusations of public sexual misconduct, which is like it is like a Jeffrey Epstein being a main character to a greater extent than I expected. I agree. I am somewhat surprised by like how omnipresent Jeffrey Epstein is in seemingly everyone's emails. But I also think that Pizzagate is wrong, right? All of their central claims are wrong. right? Pizzagate is not the claim that some powerful people somewhere are having sex with minors.
There's no basement.
There's no basement.
Yeah, okay.
There's no,
that we know
as far
of.
as I can tell, there's no rituals even. There's no, and the fact that if you look at conspiracy spaces in the wake of the Epstein files being released, they are still going through Epstein's emails, searching for the word pizza. And it's like, guys, like he's just talking about sex trafficking in the email.
right there.
Like, why is he needing but they need it to be about pizza because that's the code.
Yeah,
that's the decoding activity of the conspiracy theorist. An obvious open conspiracy is not interesting because it's not secret. So, and I discussed that in the video, right? I mean, I talked about like, the Access Hollywood tape and how Trump had more or less publicly confessed to was sexually assaulting women and no one seemed to care that much.
Yeah, well, adult women.
Yeah, adult women, yeah. But I don't know, also his Miss Teen USA pageant where he talked about walking into the locker room. I mean, and I think also like there's like in the same way there's cultural amnesia about the popularity of the Iraq War, I also think there's cultural amnesia about how normal it used to be for adult men to
Holy fuck. DGGer based true.
Sexually attracted to teenagers. I mean,
and to use positions of power to them or rape them or use them for promoting them or whatever else. Yeah.
The countdown to the Olsen.
I think that's because the whole Me Too era got hijacked in like 2 years from men in power that would literally gatekeep women out of jobs in exchange for sex, if we say generously. And then that got basically translated into I had a bad date with a guy. This is how it was basically the equivalent of rape.
Twins being legal, or Emma Watson or Natalie Portman, or it was very normal. I mean, like in 2010, I think it was like r/jailbait was voted like the subreddit of the year.
Really?
Maybe in 2008. It was early, but like I feel like there was this time when, and again, everyone seems to forget like that around the time that Epstein was first convicted in 2008, like adult men dating underage women was kind of considered like kinky or whatever, but it was not seen like with the level of abhorrence that it is now. We're seen as monstrous.
It was career upward mobility to date a powerful older man, but I mean that was adult women for like
but even like Jerry Seinfeld dated a 17-year-old, and like Kid Rock wrote songs about how he liked to do statutory rape. Ted Nugent wrote a song about being attracted to a 13-year-old. Like this has kind of been like deleted from the cultural memory, but I remember it. I don't know. And I'm not saying any of this to like excuse Jeffrey Epstein. It's just that I'm not surprised by this, and I think that some of the function of this like satanic ritual, eyes wide shut vision of what Epstein is has to do with a kind of distancing from what he was doing, right? In other words, I feel like people...
The trafficking?
Well,
as in, she's so correct. As in, Epstein is such a uniquely abhorrent, terrible, crazy, disgusting figure, and somehow by additionally condemning him and his behavior, it distances you from the fact that actually this type of, systematized abuse of younger women was kind of just always part of history and society and the way that men and women engaged with each other. But if we like really come down on Epstein, we can pretend that wasn't kind of sort of always the case.
Trafficking, and also just like the fact of like an adult men interested in teenage girls is made into this like exotic satanic thing that is like unrecognizable from anything that could go on in our schools and churches and
our whole society is based on it.
Yeah, when it's actually extremely widespread, and it's not just confined to the elite, right? I mean, the elites certainly have their version of it, and their power enables them to prolifically engage in sexual abuse, maybe in a way that would be more difficult for people who do not have that level of power and ability to like escape to islands and so on, right?
Right.
But and I think Epstein is probably fairly close to the top of the list of prolific sex abusers, right? Like in terms of the scope of what he was doing,
hopefully,
and the number of other people involved.
Like second to Caligula.
Yeah, second to Caligula. Yeah, it's I mean, it's like historic, right? But
he's on the ladder for just a little bit of a tangent, but do you remember in the atheist community in like, this was probably 2011 or something, there was a precursor to Gamergate
Elevator Gate.
Was, what was it?
Elevator Gate.
Elevator Gate, yeah. Was it Dawkins in an elevator with another woman who was speaking at the conference?
It was Rebecca Watson was the woman.
Oh my God. Oh, is this the USB dongle joke? Oh my God, this was so stupid if that's what they're talking about. Oh my God.
Okay.
And she posted this vlog after an atheist conference in which she described having been approached by a man.
Wait, nope, never mind, different thing.
Who?
Never mind.
Oh, she didn't name.
She didn't name him. Who like made an advance, in an elevator. I think asked her to come into his room for coffee, and she made a vlog where she said like, guys, don't do that. Like, no woman wants to be sexually solicited by a stranger in an elevator. The backlash against that was extreme. Richard Dawkins wrote this like comment about
what is the dongle thing? There was like some engineering conference, and I think two guys were sitting next to themselves, and they were talking about USB dongles or something. And one guy made a joke about like, oh, my USB dongle or something like that. And I think a woman behind them overheard it, and I think she tweeted out a picture of both of them with the comment. They both got fired. I think she got fired. It just turned into a massive shit show of everything.
How she was, I think, basically like mocking her for like the ridiculous complaints of Western feminists when there are women suffering under the sexism of Islamism, which is the only thing feminists should be talking about according to Richard Dawkins, right? But then there was there's also other figures like Lawrence Krauss, who had numerous allegations against him, and Michael Shermer. I think it was Lawrence Krauss who turns out to have been emailing Jeffrey Epstein about Rebecca Watson.
Wow.
And about
I knew there was some connection why I brought it. Okay.
So the idea that like again this like sex scandal in the atheist community
Earlier this week at the PyCon conference, the largest annual gathering for developers using the open source Python programming language, a woman named Adria Richards overheard a joke between two men sitting behind her during a crowded presentation. Richards was offended and took a picture of the two men who were making jokes. She tweeted, "Not cool, jokes about forking repos in a sexual way and big dongles right behind me, #PyCon." She also attached a photo of the two people making the jokes. Richards worked for SendGrid, an email delivery company, as a developer evangelist. She had 10,000 Twitter followers. Because there are so few women in tech, accusations of a sexist joke be damaging. Her tweet led to one of the people in the photo losing his job. Internet communities, Hacker News, Reddit, and even Anonymous all became involved in the situation, which resulted in an online discussion addressing the tension between the freewheeling boys will be boys atmosphere that has traditionally existed in technology and a modern politically correct atmosphere. For those of you who never heard these terms, blah, blah, blah. I'm pretty sure all three of these people ended up getting, was it just one of the guys? Or because I see here, in a statement, SendGrid said effective immediately, SendGrid has terminated the employment of Adria Richards. While we generally are sensitive and confidential with respect to employee matters, the situation has taken on a public nature. Did the one guy not get fired? Is he the only one who survived it?
Like that the men involved in this who were seen as like, they were widely admired.
Yeah, this was like over a decade ago, I think, yeah.
And at the time, it was largely the feminists who were viewed as like these unreasonable nags, like ruining all the fun.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, these men were in court having correspondences with Jeffrey Epstein about how to damage control their sexual misconduct accusations. That's the closest thing to like patriarchy being a conspiracy I've ever seen, right? Because in general, I discourage a conspiratorial view of these things. Like patriarchy is not a boardroom of men who conspire against women. It's like a system of structures, right? But there's also a little bit of minor conspiracy.
I mean, you've probably got an email thread of men coordinating against women.
Yeah. So there's a little bit of there's a little bit of conspiring
Davos
going
exists,
on
like
as well. Right. There's not zero conspiring. Like, to be clear.
Do you similarly think of this as like the kind of early historical example of that libertarian to alt-right pipeline that later became the subject of so much conversation, that the kind of atheist, skeptic, libertarian sphere was very close at one point?
I was very involved in this.
I do know. That's what I'm trying to bring up.
I mean, I was 20 years old, so I was I was not a leader of this, but I was a follower.
Yeah. You would attend meetings and things like this?
I did. I went to a few like atheist or skeptic meetups.
Wow. What was the feeling on the ground there?
It was mixed. Like there was always these kind of underlying tensions where I mean there were people who were attracted to atheism for a lot of reasons. Like I think it retroactively got stereotyped as like fedora wearing Reddit incels or something. And there was that, but it was a more diverse community than people remember. There were women there. There were people who were ex-Muslim apostates who.
Kyle Kalinske was part of it. He's very left. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it was. But there was also often a.
In a sudden move, the Secretary of the Navy, John C. Phelan, is departing his role effective immediately. Rip.
An argument around feminism that is very similar to what later happened with Gamergate. So I think at the time, like feminism was like, strongly discouraged. And it kind of boiled over around 2011, I guess is when Elevator Gate happened. And then 2012, there was this basically schism, atheist schism, right, where people divided based on, there was a faction that wanted to only focus on atheism and skepticism and hating religion and promoting science. And then there was a faction that also wanted to value progressive like social justice issues.
Oh, interesting.
And there was a conflict, and that kind of basically dissolved the entire community.
What was the political leanings of people? Could you categorize them as mostly this or mostly that?
I mean, I would say that it initially was like kind of like sort of like left libertarian. I would say it was like the kind of mainstream, with the caveat that there was a very vocal anti-Islamism that kind of shaded into and sometimes fully tipped into outright Islamophobia.
But more so anonymous than Ron Paul at that time.
Yeah. So
Rip Sam Harris.
I mean, I would say that it was to the left of Ron Paul. But then I think that the division around, I mean, it basically ran parallel to Gamergate in terms of, I mean, one of the leading atheist YouTubers that I once followed, by 2015, he was making, most of his videos were about Anita Sarkeesian, the games critic, feminist games critic who
racking up those.
Oh, is this Thunderfoot?
Was so well.
Wait, Virginia redistricting. Virginia judge blocks redistricting referendum result that boosted Democrats' election hopes. They're going to fight the order issued by Judge Jack Hurley. Yeah, that's going to be. I think they were planning that they were going to have to fight that in court, right?
The target of so much obsessive vitriol during Gamergate, right? So I think that, and then this is where like Bannon and Milo Yiannopoulos came in, and they realized this is a politically useful energy.
Yeah. I'm not going to get us in the Christopher Poole. We'll never get out of that rabbit hole. Okay, so I wanted to explore this stuff a little bit because I see a pretty direct lineage from this like YouTube skeptic, atheist, libertarian-ish leaning movement to the constituency that is now this like right-wing populism. It's the same group of people progressing over like 10, 15 years. There's an arc. You can call it a pipeline. You can like watch people move between these successive phases. How has the left changed within that time? We've been talking about this like, let's say 8-year arc. How has the left changed since you started making content?
In a lot of ways, it continues to be a fairly devastating fracture that is downwind the 2016 Democratic primary.
The long 2016.
And I think that the effects of that are still felt.
Bernie, no.
I had hoped that it was possible for there to be like a liberal left alliance. By 2024, it came to seem that wasn't possible. This, I think, to me, is a very blackpilling for me because it seems like it's less possible to make a coalition than I used to. Because in 2017, I had this moment of optimism, right? I had been, full disclosure, I mean, I'm sure that people already know this, but I was like a Hillary Clinton supporter in 2016. I mean, in part, not that I disliked Bernie, I did like him, right? But I thought at the time, I'd worked on Obama's campaign in 2012.
Whoa,
and so I remember just
operative.
how like I used to canvas, I used to do phone calls, and just to get people to want. I was like, we're trying to give you healthcare, and it was like pulling teeth to get people to be like, blah, blah, but it's socialism, and he's going to make death panels, and it's Islamic communism, and it's what I mean. Like we're talking about the Affordable Care Act, not at all a radical piece of legislation, right? But like people have been so like this like anti-socialist strain of American paranoia was so strong that I felt that Bernie Sanders could not win. Then Hillary Clinton lost, and that caused me to rethink things. I was like, well, okay, my intuitions may be wrong because I would not have thought Donald Trump would win. Maybe I was also wrong about Bernie Sanders, and so I kind of moved a bit to the left then and felt like, look, we can maybe have a kind of leftist Democratic Party, and then AOC emerged, and that was very promising in 2018. Then in 2020, of course, Bernie really lost the primary, and I think that I felt like, okay, maybe this is not translating into electoral success so much. And then by 2024, I felt
he lost in a fair fight. He didn't get swindled by the DNC.
I mean, I also personally think the claims of him being swindled by the DNC are somewhat over.
Careful. Oh, that's a hot contra take. But yes, most people believe that are on that like far left, even the progressive people. Most people believe that Bernie Sanders got robbed from both elections. The first one because the DNC was explicitly conspiring against him and he would have won if not for that. And then in the second one that all of the moderate candidates came together to rig it against poor Bernie. They believe that both of them were stolen.
Swindled by the DNC.
I mean, I also personally think the claims of him being swindled by the DNC are somewhat overstated.
Maybe not swindled, but like at least the institutional power in the DNC was so sizable and potent that the insurgent populist campaign couldn't overcome how much hegemonic power it had. They could pull different levers and get people to show up in South Carolina.
It was simpler than that. Bernie was just never going to win black votes. He just didn't court the right people. The socialist thing was a big turnoff for a lot of Americans like that. Really not more than that,
Carolina and this kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely true to some extent. I mean, I think I guess I get a little bit annoyed when people overstate that like it was rage against Bernie and that Hillary Clinton did win the popular vote by more than 3 million votes. Like, I mean, yes, Hillary Clinton has spent her career building institutional support in the Democratic Party. Bernie Sanders just showed up that year, basically, as he's an independent in Vermont.
Right. So you, as you were saying, your politics progressed after that that failure in 2020.
But then I kind of got disillusioned with it, especially when it came to 2024, and I felt that it was basically like desperately urgent to vote for Kamala Harris, and I was getting a lot of aggressive pushback on that idea from the left. So I felt kind of politically isolated by feeling that it was important to vote for Kamala Harris. I felt politically isolated in 2024, and now I kind of just don't know what to do, and I've kind of just adopted this sort of stoic, almost like submissive or defeatist attitude towards politics, which I hope that things will improve, though I don't necessarily expect it. I think that there needs what I see as the main problem on the left is there's this gap between the online leftist podcast sphere and like the liberal middle-aged women who canvass for the Democratic Party. Like,
the normie vote?
Yeah, the normie vote. But there's like no non-normie vote almost.
You're telling me that like people in middle America are not like Marxist-Leninist Maoists?
Yes, that is what I'm saying. Huh. I mean, they're not Marxist-Leninist Maoists.
It's news to me, because I had a lot of discords.
I think that despite the impression that you get in certain online spaces, I think that like Marxist-Leninist Maoist ideology is probably off-putting to most American voters. Like, again, maybe things have changed a lot since 2012, but a lot of people felt that the Affordable Care Act was too communist. So, I mean, maybe that's different now.
I think it might
be.
I
think it might be.
But it's also, I mean, Medicare for All is kind of old news to people now, so we'll see what develops. I wanted to bring this up, though, as referencing in an interview with Riley Grace Rochon, you were talking about a Discord server that you used to run at some point where there was a big factional split that opened up where the conversation was about whether it was racist to be a Marxist-Leninist Maoist, and you were like, okay, I'm just turning this thing off. So what portion of the kind of left-wing audience that you acquired within that time kind of caused you to progress in your political views as well?
Do you mean did the audience kind of lead me to?
When you see how your work is reflected by the actual audience and you think that, actually, this is not what I was trying to advance, that changes your views and you have to kind of recalibrate.
Well, I have been often surprised by how many people become like communists after watching my videos. I'm not and have never been a communist. And I don't think that I'm arguing for communism. But
what kind of communist?
Well, a variety of kinds. But the thing is, like, I've never really considered myself to be on the radical left in terms of the fact that I'm not what am I? I'm like a social democrat. Like I'm on the left wing of the Democratic Party. Let's put it that way. Right. So like my favorite politicians are people like AOC, like Mamdani. Like this is where my political allegiance is.
Okay.
I don't really. I mean, I guess it's very pragmatic too, because I think that one thing I think is an obstacle to me communicating with a lot of people on the far left is many people on the far left have like strong ideological convictions about what they think is like the ideal type of society. Like, and which to me seems almost like a kind of Plato's Republic activity that they're engaging in. Because to me, like I'm a social democrat. Am I like do I feel like deep allegiance to capitalism? No. Like, but I just live in a society where capitalism is deeply entrenched. So my pragmatic solution to that is like, look, let's make capitalism suck less somewhat, right? I think if I lived in a society where socialism was deeply entrenched, I probably would not be advocating for capitalist revolution. I would be advocating for a less bad form of socialism than whatever that was. Maybe we can have a few free markets as a treat, right? Like I think it's probably what I would be doing. Like I think that on some level the kind of non-revolutionary tendency is like a personality thing more than it is an ideological thing for me. Like I think it's not that I think abolishing capitalism is bad for ideological reasons. I just think it's unlikely to occur in my lifetime in the United States. Well, I guess I think of it as like it's alcoholism 101. You have the serenity to accept the things you cannot change. You have the courage to change what you can, and you have the wisdom to know the difference. So I think we're arguing about like the topic of abolishing capitalism. Is this a serenity problem? Is it a courage problem? Is it a wisdom problem? I think a lot of my critics on the left think it's a courage problem. Right? They think that I am a sort of like cowardly sellout lib shit or whatever. Whereas I think that they have a wisdom problem in that they are trying to, or a serenity problem, I'm not sure which. Like they're trying to change a thing that's not going to change, like not realistically in any kind of like short or middle time frame.
How do you feel about? So I'm sympathetic to this. That there's actually existing social democracy. There's a Nordic model, and those things are compelling because they work and they're real, and it's not my fantasy utopia. But what do you think about? Clearly the aspirations of the people who achieve the Nordic model were pointing beyond that. So when is it useful for us to have like maybe less practical politics as a north star by which we can incrementally judge our progress towards the society we'd like to see?
Well, some level of that is undoubtedly useful. Like I do think that people feel my temperamental like aversion to like utopian thinking is not is like, probably not the majority viewpoint. I think a lot of people like the idea of like having a very like a north star to follow, like something very hopeful and like beautiful to imagine as a future. The fact that I'm annoyed by it is like my problem maybe, but I think that I think you're right that yes, it can be helpful to have like an idea of what your ideal would be so that you can work what you're working towards even if you don't ever get there. I guess where I object to the utopian strain as I see it is where I feel like it becomes an obstacle, or it becomes the perfect becoming an enemy of the better, right? It becomes an obstacle to progress when any actually achievable goal is seen as not good enough to even be worth bothering with.
Right.
Which is again, I think the constant debate that I've been in about electoralism often centers on that these like deeply imperfect democratic candidates. Many people feel that they would be just too morally compromised if they voted for them. And I'm like, well, look, like, but there's like it's going to be one or the other, and
it can always get worse.
Yeah, and then I think people hate the like lesser of two evils thing because it's not inspiring and it's depressing, and they see it as just a slippery slope that leads to an ever worsening society. Well, to be clear, like I do not think that we're the lesser of two evils should be the Democratic Party messaging. Nor do I think that it is. But I think that it is how I think about it because I just don't. Well, people keep. I don't know. I'm just frustrated with people who won't vote, assuring me that look, if the worst candidate wins, then that will be the catalyst for a revolution. It's like, okay, well then where's the revolution?
Right.
Like, where are you? Like you said, you were a revolutionary before the election. Why are you not a revolutionary after the election? I don't know.
I think there's a fantasy that they used to call it worseism. Now they call it accelerationism. As things get worse, that creates the conditions for revolution. And that is like a very kind of comfortable subcultural identity where you don't have to get involved in the messy stuff of politics and be in a coalition with somebody that you don't personally want to hang out with. But the more kind of nitty gritty in the weeds conversation around, there are reasons why social democracy fell to neoliberalism in Europe, and there are kind of global macroeconomic tendency of the rate of profit to fall, like big kind of theoretical conversations that
social democracy fell to neoliberalism in Europe. What does that mean? I don't know what he means when he says that, but
it gets worse for a reason, and I think that is understandable, but it also has to do with like a lot of math, and that's not very sexy to be honest. Before I get us totally sidetracked, we've been talking about transformations within the left. We've touched on this a bit before, but how has the right changed in the last, let's say, like long 2016?
Well, they've really changed. I think that there was initial resistance to Trump and the Republican Party. I mean, so if you think about like Mitt Romney as a Republican candidate, the Republican Party is an unrecognizable organization compared to what it was, right? I mean, I do think that Trump kind of harnessed these energies that were always part of or at least for 50 plus years have been part of the right wing,
fall
just
of
the kind
the
of like
wall
original
in Germany
drive of right wing politics.
Social democracy was the USSR or what? I don't know.
In there.
Yeah, it's been in there, but like there's been.
Or maybe they're talking about like Margaret Thatcher tier stuff, maybe, I guess.
Or and a kind of need to mitigate the like roughest edges of it. So like I always think about this moment in like the 2008 presidential election where some woman at a rally, stands up with a microphone, asks John McCain, like, isn't Obama an Arab?
Oh, I remember.
And,
this. Yeah.
And McCain says, no ma'am. Like he's a
good family man.
Right. Which is a bit of an awkward response.
That's incredible.
But I think his heart was in the right place. Right. But I think that that woman now, she can just say that. You can just say that now in the Republican Party. But
totally.
And so I think that part of why people on the right like Trump so much is that I see him as like his obscenity and his kind of vulgarity and sadism is experienced by his followers as liberation. Like it's a liberation of like aggressive impulses that they are tired of having to repress.
Yeah.
In other words, so they view like leftist or like they view like liberal politeness, political correctness as I see it, wokeness as this like basically like phony pretend thing that is this like tedious, insincere form of like politeness that's thrust upon them and that they resent. Right? It's nagging, it's scolding, it's like this, and they sort of don't believe that anyone really believes it. And so Trump is saying what we're all thinking, and that permission to just be openly sadistic is like a massive relief to them, I think. And I think that's part of why they so devoted to Trump. And there's an interesting paradox with the strict daddy thing, because this is again where I think Lakoff maybe didn't see this coming in the 90s, is Trump is because of how obscene he is and how transgressive he is in terms of his own personal morality, which basically doesn't exist as far as I can tell. People see that as real because they see decorum and politeness and decency and trying not to be racist and things like that. They see all that as fundamentally fake because we're all sadists, right? And we all hate minorities according to their...
They think it was never real.
Yeah, it was never real. So Trump has just said it like it is and given us all permission to finally say the things that we've been thinking.
The unspeakable truth.
So I mean, I think that tendency has snowballed into a right where they're now basically, people call it like the based ritual or vice signaling, where like people on the right are basically competing with each other to be as sadistic and offensive as possible to establish their like anti-politically correct cred.
Yeah. So you'll do this better than I will. I'm going to try and set up a few things here. We have a lot of conversations online about socialism and revolution and all this stuff.
Yeah.
We are nowhere near Socialism we talk about now is social democracy. The thing that is in crisis is liberalism.
Yeah.
This is a contentious idea. I still believe in teleology that there's this linear sequential progression. Liberalism is now, its very canon is being threatened. You brought up Locke before. There's Rousseau, there's Hobbes. There's kind of different arguments about how this whole thing works. And the new right, what we used to call it before that was the Dark Enlightenment.
Yeah.
And the position that we find ourselves in now is that the online socialist movement has become so untethered to its roots and its philosophical argumentation that it is literally not able to refute these anti-Enlightenment ideas. And so we come back to, okay, just might is right, and that's all that there was.
Yeah.
The kind of deeper problem underneath it, so I'm kind of showing my cards here on the podcast. I do not have this figured out, but in advance of sitting down with Francis Fukuyama, I went back, I took that very seriously, and I reread all of his stuff. I reread Locke and Hobbes and Rousseau. And it does really seem
I read every
like
single book before I
the degree to which we believed that Enlightenment institutions could set up rules and norms by which people would have to abide, that was backed up by the monopoly on violence that was held by the state.
Yes.
And now those Enlightenment institutions have become so corrupt that the legitimation of the public, they no longer believe in these institutions. And so you get someone to come along who's just like, all right, might makes right, and it's always been that way. So the question that is really uncomfortable for people on the left is to what degree, in that this kind of like Hobbes framing of justice is enforced by the public sword, that to what degree do we need to have this kind of might to even enforce those Enlightenment values under which we could have equality?
Yeah.
And that is so existentially uncomfortable that people would rather create a like fictional communist identity as like a cat character than engage in that conversation and have to deal with like the arc of global development in post-1989. So how do we even begin to approach this and tackle these kind of dark Enlightenment, anti-Enlightenment ideologies? What do we have in our toolkit to push back against these things?
Well, the might makes right thing is something that I definitely struggle with, because I do think that, I don't think it's more of a crisis for liberals even than it is for like the people who are on the like Marxist left. Because Marx has always been kind of, there's an element of might makes right in that too, right?
Marxist Leninists.
Yeah, because they're completely against it. They're like liberal morality, which is even hypocritical. And it is a little bit hypocritical, I mean, inevitably, because there's a level in which might does kind of, well,
this is the subtext of a lot of your video.
Yeah, might is like the grounds of the possibility of right, to say it in some like really convoluted, like leftist sounding way. But like, I think that something like human rights are possible because the people who have monopoly on violence insist on human rights.
Because they have the nukes.
Yeah, exactly.
It's descriptive, not prescriptive. It just tells you how things are, not how they should be, right?
The whole world order is upheld basically by a bunch of countries pointing nuclear weapons at each other. The whole political world map is drawn in blood. Like, no one wants to think about this. I don't want to think about it because it's like, it does like challenge your self-conception as someone who doesn't believe in violence. I think you do have to realize that you sort of do believe in violence. You just you have to decide what kind of violence you believe in. And I think that there's forms of violence that reduce other forms of violence, right? So it's about, I think the honest view is to talk about what types of violence those are. I mean, I think the existence of a state depends on some level of violence, right?
Yes.
So most of us, I would say, believe in the existence of some kind of state. So we believe in some kind of violence that maintains that order. What I like about democracy, there's a lot of things I hate about democracy. I feel like I've been encountering a lot of those lately, but I still do like democracy. And one thing I like about it is that it provides a means to change society that doesn't involve like a massive amount of bloodshed.
It avoids violence.
Yeah. And I mean, even though it is still upheld by, the order is maintained by police and on the inside and the army on the outside.
Sweden has police too.
Yeah, Sweden, everyone has police. Like, I think that it's the less violent way of conducting things, right? And for a time, it was possible to change the direction of American government anyway, or many liberal democratic governments without outright like civil war, right? And now it seems like maybe that's going to get harder if things continue going the way they are. I dread that.
Should the left abandon the Enlightenment?
No, I think that would be a huge mistake. In that, I think human rights are a good idea in particular, right? I think that you can even be, a lot of Western Marxists try to reconcile the two, right? Like the idea is that in some ways Marxism is an extension of the Enlightenment, right?
Yes.
Like it's just a broadening of the Enlightenment project to recognize this other type of exploitation that wasn't seen as exploitation by the like classical liberal thinkers.
And there were socialist Marxist revolutions that cited the Enlightenment and they were part of the lineage.
Or even like Vietnamese communists by the American Revolution. I think that it is a mistake to discard the Enlightenment for a couple of reasons. Like one is that I think human rights are a very good idea that we should hold on to. That even a violent revolution ends with the establishment of a new state, right? And we want that state to maintain some of the Enlightenment project. I should hope, right? I like freedom of speech. I even like freedom of religion, despite its many problems. Cults, for example, right? Like there's a reason why most societies do not have freedom of religion, right? But I still like it. I can explain why if you ask, but
most societies, like historically or modernly.
I'll just leave it.
Do you want to chase that rabbit hole a little bit, because there is a kind of parallel between the often people will call like Marxist groups cults. Yeah. Like there's these subcultural cults.
Well, I think there's a version of Marxism that is in competition with religion, in terms of providing like a kind of massive meta narrative of what
Secretary Navy is out. We saw that. Old news. Noob. Loser.
Which human suffering is and what the solution to the suffering is, right? Because I think that's what most religions do, is they sort of diagnose the problem of human existence and they propose a kind of salvation. So I think for some leftists...
Okay.
What?
That article...
Oh.
I can't even believe...
You should have seen the video, bro. Holy
No, I'm going to watch
fuck.
it. I was looking at my Twitter when I woke up from my nap, and I was like, oh, Steve's canceling his New York Times subscription? Is he trolling here? And then I like go down and I'm like, what the What are we doing here?
You should watch that video. It's pretty.
I'll watch it tomorrow morning, I think.
Pretty wild. It's worse than you think it is. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I canceled my subscription. I added them, and I mean, hopefully we can get something done. This is absolutely insane. Probably not.
That's okay.
But this is the second time New York Times has done something retarded in like the last week.
Just the second time?
The other one, well, the other one I remember off the top of my head was like the guy who had nonverbal autism, who the lady just wrote like a puff piece about and didn't do any actual questioning or any interesting.
That kind of slop though is, I mean, unfortunately, but yeah, no, but this one was pretty wild. I don't know.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm excited to watch it tomorrow.
Be careful.
I'll be back.
Marxist analysis kind of fulfills that rule, right? They sort of maybe overly broadly attribute class conflict to be like the source of all human suffering and all injustice, right? And then they propose like a revolutionary solution where it is kind of like eschatological. I don't think this is inherent to Marxism. Like I think you can be, but I do think that when a communist society, for example, attempts to extirpate religion, it is establishing a kind of state religion. And that's the liberal in me, is I don't like that. Like I like, as problematic as it is, I kind of do like this John Rawls idea of like, you know, you have liberal political subjects who also may have their private religious conviction. I think there's human needs that politics doesn't meet, in other words. Right? I think there's forms of suffering that don't originate from inequality or from oppression.
There was a human soul before there was the extraction of surplus value.
I do think so. And I also think, I think the best evidence for it is like, behold the misery of rich people, right? I mean, I think some people would want to attribute that to like, well, that's just the corruption of the nature of the evolution. Like in a way, like the capitalist also suffers from the like inhuman system that he's benefiting from in certain materially.
I've heard people tell me that.
And there's probably some truth to that. But I think there's also just a kind of more baseline like dukkha, so unsatisfactoriness, like to use like a Buddhist terminology.
What is that? I'm not familiar with that one.
It just means unsatisfactoriness, the kind of sort of default like state of clinging and craving that's just part of human psychology. I think there's a restlessness in the human soul that's not necessarily political. So I believe that religion will always exist to address that. And I think the attempt to substitute politics for some form of spirituality is a mistake.
We're talking about people's belief systems changing. Do you know creators, you don't have to name people in particular, but do you know creators, content creators who have shifted towards the right in the last few years?
I know of them. I'm not in touch.
But not personally.
Yeah, not personally. Well, I don't.
How about maybe not content creators? Do you just know people in your personal life that have like drifted over to this other thing?
Yeah.
What were the contributing factors? If we can maybe look at them as an anonymous case study, what goes into that?
I think that the coronavirus pandemic like devastated a lot of people in multiple different ways, economically and psychologically and socially. And I think that a lot of people got, I mean, as if we didn't already have enough like online political derangement, there were barrels of gasoline that hadn't yet been lit, and the coronavirus was a match. And like I think that a lot of people suddenly became very angry and resentful and wanted to tell them what to be angry and resentful about. And that's what a lot of online political content basically does. It tells you it gives you like a shape to your anger. And unfortunately, a lot of what people come across as right-wing content at one point or another, right? Even people who really, if you would think would know better. There's like surgeons who became anti-vaxxers and stuff, you know?
Yeah. The internet plays a big role in like every one of those instances.
Absolutely, yeah.
Is there, I don't know if I have a great segue for this, so I'll just ask the question. Is there some part of our current media ecosystem? So I used to do a different job before this, now I do this. And the mental health toll of like talking to this many people about these specific subjects, like this shit is not normal. The human brain is not evolved to deal with hundreds, thousands of people yelling things at you. Is there some part of this media ecosystem that is like making the storytellers, the narrative content creators themselves, people who tell society stories and narratives, is the media ecosystem making them crazy, which is part of this distorting effect?
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like I've seen a lot of people basically lose their mind because they got famous online.
Yes.
And the experience of being famous online, to almost any extent, you don't even have to be that famous for this to start setting in, right? Is that, I mean, the least bad is just like so many people who do this. You just hear in conversations with them, there's as much as people like to insist they don't care what other people think, the obsession with your haters. Like, so it gets to people. It just does. It gets to everyone.
Even people with like 1,000 followers.
1,000 followers,
like,
right. And their entire like channel is camera commentary and makeup or whatever. Like this or anime, like the vitriol that you'll get for doing anime commentary is like
for being a white creator, or what's
that? No, just for like having the wrong opinion about the fandom, you know? Like
it's worse than the Marxist factional
splits.
Well,
it can be. I mean, this is a more like female part of the internet, but in like shipping wars, I don't know if you're familiar with this.
Relationship.
Yeah. So like in fandom spaces, there's been like unbelievably vicious online feuds about like which characters you think should be romantically paired. Right. And then like, because people get so libidinally invested in this, they also like start to like attach political justifications to it. Like it is racist if you think these two characters should be together. Like if you ship Rey and what's that guy's name from Star Wars? Kylo Ren.
Oh, how is that?
Reylo is racist because there's a perfectly good black man there and you're not shipping them.
Oh. That's okay. You know what?
Yikes.
All right.
Right.
All right.
I mean, it also makes you, you know,
I thought we were past this kind of apathenic racism allegations.
This kind of peaked in the late 2010s.
Yeah.
But like the point is that the level of vitriol involved may as well have been an argument about geopolitics. But yeah, like I mean, well, so like J.K. Rowling, to take an example, right, is someone who like is like smart on some level and is capable of being better than this, but she said something stupid on the internet, got extremely harshly criticized, doubled down, tripled down, quadrupled down, quintupled down, based her entire personality around how she was surrounded by haters and losers, and then it's just like this madness that it completely takes over your brain. And like you become like a shell of what you once were, because your entire personality is now like rewired around like this constant sense of threat from this criticism that you're reading.
Have you, Clark, who's a producer on the show, told me this, but they're recasting the entire Harry Potter movies because none of the previous cast wants to work with this crazy woman.
Yeah.
So they're locking these like 12-year-olds into lifelong contracts that no matter what she says on Twitter, they have to play these characters in perpetuity for the rest of their lives. It's incredible. And I mean, they're spending, I think, $100 million on every episode to like, basically start the IP over because none of the previous cast wants to work with her. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, that is an astonishing waste of money.
That's, speaking of having a big platform, how do you consider the responsibilities that come with your platform? Do you have a sense of the age bracket of your viewership and gender breakdown, some of the things we talked about before?
Yeah, it's difficult to transition from being the underdog to someone that people perceive as like an established big name. I think every creator who gets to the point where anyone thinks of them as an established big name struggles with that, because in a lot of ways it gets, I mean, you're lucky, you are, but it also gets harder, and people's expectations really increase. So, you know, it takes a long time to get used to just like posting whatever your thoughts are today, because that's just a person on the internet doing that. To someone who people view as an influencer, who has a platform and responsibility to use it. I've been doing this long enough, I feel like I've adapted. And as far as my audience, I'm very glad that my audience is mostly people who, it's not teenagers, which I would not like. If my audience was teenagers, I think I would feel a much higher degree of like responsibility, or like the need to like, you know, be a good influence and so on. I prefer to communicate to an adult audience because I think it, in a way, I'm always trying to like lower the moral bar for myself a little bit, because, high expectations are a burden. It's less fun to need to, you know what I mean? But I think that, I mean, what is my audience? It's mostly like age 20, it's mostly age 25 to 40. I think it's like...
Has it drifted upwards
as you've progressed? It's gotten a bit older as I have,
So it's people who learned about you early on and stayed with it.
Stayed with it. I mean, I definitely do have like a significant, you know, younger audience as well. And then as far as you mentioned the gender split, I initially had a much more male audience. I think it like initially was like 70% male. It's now pretty close to 50, usually skewing slightly male.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah.
I'm sure you know this, but that's like very anomalous for
political content,
Political content, but you're also like talking about movies, so there's maybe a genre bleed.
I think there was I think there was like 1 or 2 months where for the first time ever I had more female audience than male.
Unheard of.
It was because I made a video about Twilight.
Yeah.
But like, or it was a video about feminine sexuality really, but it was called Twilight, and I think it was a video that I made with a female audience in mind. But yeah, I think that, you know, then I made a video about conspiracy theories and a video about horror movies, so it's skewing male again. I do think my audience.
Did you do that on purpose also? You picked like the girl movie and the boy movie back to back?
A little bit.
Exactly.
I do think that like, well, they're both movies that were highly controversial in the 2000s and widely hated, and movies which at the time I hated both of them. And then like kind of like reassessed as an adult and was like, was this really a good use of energy hating this thing, right? And like wanted to understand this thing that I used to hate, right? And so I think that, I do think the Saw video, it is in a way the kind of like evil brother of the Twilight video.
To watch part 2 of this.
I love this guy's random ad break shot. Sykuno male manipulator fan edit. Jesus Christ.
This episode, you can support the show on Patreon. So we were talking before about your experience in college and teaching and Wittgenstein and all these things. What about some of your early experiences in getting into politics? What was like the on-ramp for you? Was there a particular book, documentary, a club in school or something like that? How did you get interested in this stuff?
Well, as far as, I mean, I first got interested in politics in high school, I guess, in terms of being opposition to the Iraq War. That was my first like, semi-adult political issue that really grabbed me. I would say as far as getting involved in like political philosophy, well, I sort of got into it when I was at music school. I was like 19 years old. And like getting into like new atheist YouTube, kind of, I don't know. At the time I was very like mesmerized by someone like Christopher Hitchens and his like verbal fluency and his like persuasiveness. And he somehow like there's something sort of like sexy about him in the way that he like would make literacy and political commentary into this. I mean, he certainly seemed to enjoy the sound of his own voice, but that was okay. So did I, right? But I think that then I kind of...
Stream is cooked on YouTube. Not sure about other platforms. Wait, what? Oh, my data's dropping. I don't know why. I don't know if that's my end or YouTube's end.
I came to do that as embarrassing. When I got a little more educated, I switched from music to psychology and philosophy.
It's going up and down. Yeah, just like your mom. Got him. Seems okay on my end. Well, it's not. I can see the data going down. I'm just not sure what the cause is.
In Europe and in the United Kingdom where I'm from, the age of consent is 16, and I did sleep with a 16-year-old when I was 30. But when I was 30...
Jesus. What?
In Europe and in the United Kingdom where I'm from, the age of consent is 16.
Wow, Eliminator, thank you for the 5 gifted subs. On kick.
And I did sleep with a 16-year-old when I was 30. But when I was 30, I was a very different person. I was a lot younger, and I was an immature 30-year-old. Consensual sex, actually, with a variety of people, when there is a strong power differential, as there is when you're a famous man that has the ability to attract women that I had at that time, I think involves exploitation. I think it is exploitative. I recognize that my sexual conduct in the past was selfish, and I did not apply enough consideration, barely any I suppose, really, to how that sex was affecting other people.
The Megyn Kelly Show.
I used to love, I still do actually, love Slavoj Žižek's, especially his, was it Pervert's Guide to Cinema?
So good.
I love that movie.
Yeah,
and that is a video essay.
Yeah,
And it was directed by Sophie Fiennes, I think.
Set design and everything.
Yeah. That's an early video essay, early leftist video essay. In a way that those movies are like RedTube before RedTube.
I made a video homage to that piece also.
Really?
I absolutely love it. You should show it in my class. So Žižek was
So I
part of
love
your
those.
onboarding?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
And then I guess, as far as video essays are concerned, it was like FilmTube that I feel like really kind of got me to come
movie reviews.
Movie reviews. That's where like the best, I would say, skills of video essays originated.
Right.
And commentary on. I mean, it must have been like 2010 or something. There was this viral review of the Star Wars prequels by a channel called Red Letter Media.
Okay.
And it was this review that was it's done in character as this like serial killer alcoholic who's reviewing the Star Wars prequels. And it was like so much funnier and so much like better organized than like the vlog style of YouTubing I was used to at that time. It made an impression on me. And I think I think it made an impression on a lot of YouTubers my age who do video essays now. They're very influential.
Red Letter Media.
Yeah.
Was that the Scarlet Letter or what's the reference in there?
Oh my God. He doesn't know.
I actually don't know.
Does it sound kind of vaguely communist too?
It does. They're not communist though.
They're okay.
They're just a bunch of guys in the Midwest. I don't even know if they're progressive. They're just film reviewers.
I assume that all criticism is somehow progressive, but I realize that is not actually the case.
I don't think it's actually the case.
That's like a hazard of going to like art school, I guess.
Yeah. No, I don't think they are especially progressive. In fact, they were sort of like edgy and transgressive in that like they're a little older though, so it wasn't like in a 4chan way.
Yeah.
It was kind of some of the humor has like aged badly. There was like a running joke about him having like a woman he had abducted locked in the basement. My Steelman interpretation of this is that. So what is the joke with that? I mean, is it misogynistic? Like, yeah. But also, I feel like the joke was kind of like, what is the kind of person that makes a 5-hour review of Star Wars prequels?
Wow.
The kind of person who has a woman change in his basement.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Okay. Well, fairly argued. What about following that? So bring us from like 2010 to 2016. Were there other formative influences, maybe in the field of psychology, philosophy, stuff like that?
Well, when I was as an undergraduate, I got very into critical theory. I got very into, I think I read most of the like major critical theory canon. Are we talking
about Frankfurt School? Or
yeah,
like
Frankfurt School, but also the kind of like John Berger and
Hell yeah.
Society of the Spectacle.
Contra wishes she had anywhere near the political education background that Hassan had. Shake my head.
And Baudrillard and like all that stuff. And philosophy, I mean, I was getting a PhD in Northwestern, which is it's like a kind of continental leaning department that's still sort of grounded in like Anglo-Kantianism, which, if that means anything. If I had stayed, I probably would have ended up doing something on like aesthetics and like Kant and Hegel or something. I have no regrets about not doing that. But yeah, I think, like I said, the only course I taught as a full professor was this course on Wittgenstein. And Wittgenstein to me is kind of an anti-philosopher, the late Wittgenstein anyway. Like in the philosophical investigations, what he's doing is kind of like teaching you like how to stop getting trapped in the puzzle box of philosophy of language, which is kind of a waste of time and a misunderstanding of language, which is, he argues, like based on use. It's not there's like this Platonic tradition in Western philosophy that tries to understand like what is beauty really, what is justice really, and it sees words as pointing to a concept, and the concept as something that actually exists. And so Wittgenstein is trying to get you to not see language this way, and see more. So it's kind of anti-philosophy, which also kind of contributed to me not wanting to do philosophy. I think. But
really?
That's Wittgenstein's gift to me. He saved me from a lifetime of having to do philosophy. Like
you killed yourself in the process.
Yeah. Like, I was cured.
Man, this would be a great transition here for this next question, but I'm going to take a tangent.
Okay.
How do you feel about this kind of canon, or like, let's call it post-Marxist, Baudrillard, I don't know, Foucault, this kind of thing? The philosophy that is in vogue in the Western Academy, that thing came into prominence at the same time when we saw left-wing intellectuals move into the academy and become like very disconnected from the workers' movement and stuff like this. How do you now reflect on Baudrillard? Was very influential for me. It was like, I think that was one of my first serious, like, oh, I like theory. I think a lot of people have that
Artists
experience.
always like Baudrillard.
Who?
Artists.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Simulation, simulacrum, kind of thing. It's great. Great memes as well. But how do you reflect back on that canon now? Like, maybe we can take them as separate topics, like Baudrillard and Foucault, for example. But like the academic elite has kind of like run wild with these things, and I think applied them unproductively, shall we say, in different occasions.
For decades too.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I've read a lot of Foucault. I've TA'd a class on Foucault. I guess I kind of look back on him as cringe. I guess because to me, I just can't. I can't like get rid of the association with like very serious undergraduates.
Yeah.
I mean, like in the video about Saw, I talk about how like the reform of the justice system, like all, in some ways the humanitarian angle on that reform is a little bit of a euphemism for like in some ways increasing ability to be more dominating or more controlling, right, through incarceration, through discipline, through. I could have mentioned Foucault. I kind of decided not to because I'm like, oh, it's really another video essay that mentions discipline and punish.
It was
like it just felt a little bit video essay 101. Not that it's fine. Like it's fine to be. Like I used to do that, but I think sometimes you just get tired of it. I also just found that like oftentimes I can say the same thing more clearly without mentioning Foucault.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
And so basically, there's sort of like no reason to bring it up except to like signal your elite education, which I see no value in. Well, I see no value in elite education. I see no value in like
the signaling.
It's obnoxious.
Yeah. Okay, so this would have been my segue. Brilliant. But totally missed the opportunity. My window was gone. Did you ever pill yourself researching a right-wing topic and in the process change your mind on the issue?
Like, did I ever go to like shift towards the right-wing position?
So, for example, Lee Phillips, author of The People's Republic of Walmart, he is an advocate for nuclear power, and he was originally very green, solar wind, and in the process of researching it to quote debunk it, he then convinced himself that it was actually a much better idea. They say this for right-wing conspiracy researchers and think tanks, that they like put them in the field for 3 to 6 months, but if they do it for too long, there's a hazard of them becoming like influenced by the material that they're supposed to have critical distance from. Yeah,
I'm trying to think of an example where that's happened, and I think there's been cases where I sort of concluded that like the current most trendy leftist take on something is wrong.
Yeah.
Like I think I had this. Well, I mean, this is like very sort of niche and probably to most people ludicrous and self-evidently so, but like in the trans community in the late 2010s, it's been so mocked. You hate to even mention it, but like the notion of like dozens of genders, right? Like there was a subset.
Oh my God, the 50 million pronoun thing or all this bullshit.
People who, exactly, who wanted to entertain the idea of being dragged in gender, and they were like very stridently insistent that if you were not entertaining this seriously, then you were a transphobic bigot, just as bad as any Nazi or whatever. And it just doesn't make any sense, right? Because I believe in.
I wonder if she'll have any comments on non-binary people.
I believe in non-binary gender identity, but I think that what a lot of people were doing with the Mogai stuff is they had overextended the concept of gender to basically use it as an expressive vocabulary for basically any facet of personality. So I think I quietly considered that was not serious.
The kind of Angela Nagel criticism of that like emerging Tumblr community.
I think in 2020, I also felt that the kind of abolish the police thing. I mean, we've already mentioned this. We're not going to abolish the police. Like,
that's the theme of this podcast is we should not let people forget their recent mistakes because we have not yet learned from them.
Well, I think that it's tough when you're in the moment because the thing is like oftentimes like arguing against the lunatic fringe of your own side does kind of become a prelude to some like rightward trajectory. So you will get a ton of backlash for even suggesting it. But
not to interrupt you on this. And you cannot respond to this also, but part of my theorizing this space has been one of the things that leads people down these different politicization pipelines or what have you is that there is no pushback on the most extreme elements. And so what you need to kind of create is like basically a buffer that there is some channel on the left that will push back against the activist fringe that's not representative of the coalition we need to build. And if we don't have that, we're then in Brandolini's law again, where we're basically ceding the people we need to convince to our opponents.
Yes. So I think that like it is important to push back against the most extreme wing. And I try to do so gently, but it does cause, it's hard and people get really, really mad. So I never push back on the abolish the police thing because I didn't want to be like a white person doing it. I should have gently pushed back a little bit, but I would have gotten a lot of shit.
One of the questions that I hear all the time from journalists, and I'm sure that you get this too, is why are people more radical now, and are people more radical now, like compared to like the 1920s, for example, the 2020s? Like, do you see this as basically a rising arc that is unprecedented, or is it cyclical, or how do you understand this phenomenon?
I see it as cyclical. I mean, in the 70s, like there were like far left groups like bombing things and like, kidnapping heiresses and robbing banks. Like, I mean, we don't even have that now. Like, at least I don't know. There's not many militant leftist groups in the U.S. who are doing like
not that I know of.
Terrorism or bank robberies. Like I feel like this is not even a thing. So in some ways, I feel like we're maybe like less radical than in the 1970s. Is it more radical than it was in the 2010s or the 2000s or the 90s? Yeah, definitely. Although the 90s had a ton of far right terrorism. Like, Oklahoma City bombing. You had like
right.
That's where the militia groups really started.
We talked to Andrew Callahan. He told us about his theory of radicalization. Do you have a particular theory of radicalization of all of these contributing factors that go into someone's political transformation?
I guess I have an answer, but I'm like, worried it's a little bit too boring. I mean, I think that like the radicalization I see happening today is like a result of kind of like social disconnection, economic stagnation, and then just a social media environment where like people just tell you what to do.
Those are literally my three things.
Well, I mean, sometimes it's just that's
well
why.
Done. Okay. That was going to be all my follow-ups too.
Sorry.
Okay, let's just reiterate. So economic decline, social atomization, and then the other part was media.
The availability of like alternative media, much of which is kind of radicalizing.
Do we need more radical politics now under Trump 2 as compared to Trump 1, for example? Should we on the left in some way get more radical or active in some way?
I mean, I think that being more radical ideologically, no. I don't think we do need to be more radical ideologically. I think what we need to be is a little bit more focused on like actions that can really be enacted. Like pragmatic. That's what I'm saying. I mean, that's kind of my continuous theme I'm harping on here. But like, I think that becoming a more radical version of Maoism is like
shiny path.
It's not helpful. I don't know. I'm not convinced it's helpful anyway. Maybe we can make a counter argument. Maybe people in the comments will make a counter argument. But I see it as being basically kind of almost self-sabotaging to the point where you're sort of like radicalizing yourself into this space where you can't talk to normal people and where your politics are disconnected from any achievable end. So I think like I know a lot. So my personal thing is like I think we should be talking about building influence within the Democratic Party and then electing those politicians. Some people don't want to talk about that because they have an extremely strong version to the Democrats and they don't.
Understandably.
Okay, fine. Well, find something else to do. Like there's other things to do, right? Like I am happy to acknowledge that like voting for Democrats is not the only way that you can be politically efficacious. Like I'm aware. There's other ways to organize. There's other ways to protest. There's other ways to unionize, strike. Well, then do those things. You have to kind of log off. I guess to actually do that. Like consuming media is not praxis. I guess is what I'm saying.
Right.
I feel like there's this kind of fandom tendency on the online left where people feel that like by being a part of this online fandom they are doing activism. But they're basically just very passively consuming media.
It's like Spotify stands. It's like let's get the plays up and that means we win the ladder.
No, I know. It's exactly
There are examples of like a call to action where you bring people to protest or canvas or something like that. But let's go into theory land here for a moment. So one of the things that I've been thinking about over the last year in particular is that I am still attached to the idea of a vanguard in some way. And I think that we have on the left internalized the laws of social media where everything needs to be made visible. By social media, I mean like Web 2, open internet. Everything needs to be accessible, transparent, made visible. And I think that, like, as evidenced by the difficulty of some of these topics, in any other left-wing organization in the past, you would have closed doors conversations that would not be visible to the public. And so we could talk about like trans issues, for example, like inside the party, we know what our values are. And then outside of it, maybe we don't broadcast that to all of the normies because they want to hear the bread and butter issues, for example. But inside the party, like we know where we stand on this thing. And so part of the problem is trying to make all of our vanguard positions visible to the popular will who are necessarily not going to be on board because they're not leading the movement. So I feel like we basically like forgot 100 years of socialist education and like internalized the libertarian values of the people who built social media. How do we have these private conversations in which, you can have a more advanced position that maybe like you don't talk about publicly?
Well, I completely agree with that, and I actually don't think I would have thought to put it that way. But you're right, that is a huge problem. Like, there's been a collapse of the distinction between like on-stage and off-stage discourse, right?
Yeah.
Like, but there's no off-stage now. Everything's on-stage, and as a result, like a lot of nuance can't be worked through. You almost can't like think because you are always performing. And thinking means like considering wrong ideas, and and it means experimenting with things that go too far. And I mean, right? So how to create those off-stage spaces? I mean, people do it. Like, there's Discord servers and things where people have less public conversations. But yeah, I agree that like social media cannot be the only forum where conversation is going on, because that it's way too public, and so it just always will attract viewers that it's not intended for, and it will. I mean, it's also like just not a good place to do thinking, because everything is so like permanent, and people can take screenshots of it and share it out of context and send it to Fox News, and like, it's very limiting.
That would normally be like grounds for being kicked out of the meeting if you try to secretly record it.
Right.
Yeah.
But everything's recorded all the time when you're doing it on social media.
Yeah. It's almost like they built it intentionally.
Well, yeah, maybe. I mean, maybe.
You mentioned Rawls before. Who else is in your kind of like canon of references that maybe people today should explore more?
Oh, geez, let's think. Well, I feel like this is a more recent development in my thinking, but in the last 2 years, I've gotten very into psychoanalysis. I think as a result of like, well, this is one area where I disagree with the Enlightenment. Right?
Okay.
Is like the Enlightenment, and this is me getting to the Enlightenment via New Atheism. But New Atheism was an Enlightenment movement in a lot of ways, right? Like, especially with the sort of, I want to call it like a fetish for reason, the reason and logic.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's something about encountering the absurdity of people who claim to be like supremely rational, just demonstrably not being so. It caused me to think about like, well, to take an interest in sort of the emotional aspect of politics, which is also, I think, sometimes often kind of like neglected from the Marxist perspective or from the materialist only perspective, is that I mean, something like that analysis of like mommy politics and daddy politics as being this like, people's feelings about politicians are sort of these like deep like transferences of feelings about parents.
Are you talking about like a nation that wants revenge for an injury to the
that's
Germany after World War I?
Yeah, that's one example, certainly. I mean, and then another is just like the appeal of Trump. There's like some like libidinal thing that taps into, and I think that to me is kind of where I've been drawn as I try to understand like what looks like a kind of madness to a lot of people. I mean, fascism always does. People, everyone in the 30s who called Hitler madness, right? Like Germany's national madness, right? And I think that can be like a little bit of a non-explanation. So, but I think the point is something real, which is like there's like some kind of deep unconscious emotional force that is involved in a lot of politics, and I think the attempt to psychoanalyze it is something I have found to be helpful and interesting in making sense of why things happen. So that's been a newer. I mean, I guess it's in Zizek. He's very like into depths of Lacanian psychoanalysis.
Okay. Not you Lacanian, Freudian, or do you have a preferred term for these?
I like Freud best actually, because I mean part of it has to do with like, well, I think I disagree on a personality level with Freud. He's very like, I mean, he's talking about irrationality in a very rational way. Whereas like someone like Jung is a little bit of a crystal girl. For my taste, it's like I don't know. I mean, that can be fun. I don't know. I have a lot of paradox at home myself, but like, come on, at a certain point, like I feel like Freud's kind of cynicism about society is sort of based on aggression and sexuality. I agree with that. That's how I see things. I think I love listening to people summarize Lacan at me. Zizek is very interesting when he talks about Lacan. I've never been able to read Lacan and have a good time. He's impenetrable to me. And I'm pretty good at reading pretty impenetrable stuff, but I think that this is like, I'm not sure if he's saying anything. I don't know.
You like someone else's version of it?
I would like someone else's version, yeah. I would like someone to translate it into a language I can understand, yeah.
On the topic of irrationality, this is some of the content in your conspiracy video, but to some degree, conspiracy is a contemporary form of elite resentment, particularly the internet type that we have now. But you seem skeptical about its ability to lead to class consciousness.
What is this tweet? Trump administration asked FIFA to replace Iran with Italy, which failed to qualify at the upcoming World Cup, according to Financial Times report. Nice.
Do you think there's any pipeline, so to speak, that connects those things? Is there someone who could be a reformed conspiracy theorist and then is awakened to the Marxist economic structure or something like that?
I think that does happen, but I think that conspiracist populism is so compelling to people because I think it's very intuitive, and because it speaks to like the kind of the interpersonal drama that is more intuitive to like most human thinking. Right? Scientific thinking is something you have to kind of be trained in, whereas to understand like plots and intrigues and good versus evil, like that's like children can do that, right? So I think that there's something sort of emotionally satisfying about conspiracist interpretations of politics that a more scientific or structural or Marxist or materialist explanation kind of like it's. I mean, you don't necessarily have to be super educated, but it helps. And I think that you can be self-educated on it, of course.
Trainwreck's brain broken clip. He's streaming again.
Bro, this Elon Omar, bro. I don't know, I don't understand what's going on in these countries. I don't get it, bro. So far in the last 3 weeks, I've seen the Democratic leaders act more like dictators than anything that I've seen from the Republican side. And yet the mobs on the internet of the left that claim they're leftists, that hate fascists or dictators or kings, have said nothing. It's just weird to me. It's really weird to me. Yeah, I'm not asking them to switch over to be Republican, but at least hold your party to the same accountability you hold the Republican Party. And then every up and coming leader, whether it be a content creator or
talk to him. This guy's barely political. I have no idea. He probably saw one tweet where somebody said something mean and it informed his entire political outlook. Here, I don't know what you want me to say. Jesus.
Or informally educated, absolutely right. But I think it takes a little bit more cognitive effort to think that way than it does to think in terms of conspiracies. So that's why I'm kind of skeptical about, pessimistic, I guess, when I see how prevalent conspiracism has gotten. I think in the same way that Trumpism is attractive, I think conspiracism is it's sort of easy for people.
Yeah, there's a part of me that's hopeful that someone who sees, maybe they voted for Trump, and they see the Epstein files, and they're like, oh, he's in it, he's part of the swamp or whatever. And then they're like, okay, so I'll take the left-wing populist candidate as a response to that. But that might be falling under the Brandolini's law type of situation.
I mean, I think more optimistically, I think we can expect some level of conversion. I think especially because Trump he's like broke, he's like violated every single thing that people said they wanted him to do. Right? They wanted no wars. Like they wanted prices to go down, and he's systematically violated each of those things. They wanted the Epstein files to be released. He's blocked it. Like it's actually, like you say, impressive. Like almost systematic attempts to refute everything his followers said they wanted. And I think he has a core of supporters who will. We've always been at war with East Asia. This, but I think that there's that middle 30% of people who, for reasons I truly don't even really understand, had this idea of Trump as like someone who would lower prices, and I think Trump benefited from kind of a nostalgia for the pre-pandemic age, where like even though a lot of the worst of the pandemic happened under Trump's presidency, I think they were able to kind of like retroactively like frame the pandemic as like a Biden thing, and
that Biden forced people to get vaccinated.
Yeah, Biden forced
Operation Warp Speed under Trump.
But like
it's amazing.
The kind of like conspiracy fear of like the totalitarian enforcement of masks and vaccines. This was attributed to Biden and Fauci, and then Trump. I think
they did it with the infrastructure spending too. That was like Biden's infrastructure spending out the COVID stimulus that caused like the inflationary effects. It's like amazing.
Yeah, and then they had this like Russian invasion of Ukraine and sanctions as well. That resulting in gas prices going up, right? But like so, I mean, I certainly understand nostalgia for before the pandemic. I feel that, but I think that it's not going to work this time because that happened at the very end of Trump's presidency. I don't know. I think Trump is going to kind of lose the middle populists. I really think at the end of it. I think that's happening. So there's a window here for a more left populist.
Yeah. You say in that video.
Do you think the FIFA World Cup should put Iran, Russia, Israel, and USA in a group, and the winner can take control of Hormuz? True. That sounds like it could be an anime.
I've heard the sentiment. A student said it when I taught last semester as we were starting the show in the fall of 2024, and they said that conspiracy used to be a left-wing thing before the internet. And you say something in that video like, I remember when conspiracies used to be kind of left-wing, like under Obama or something like that.
Yeah.
Would you reconstitute what that culture was like? Because I think Gen Z kids, like if you're 15 right now, you can never even imagine that was ever the case.
Well, I guess I think saying that it was always a leftist thing is overstating it, because right-wing conspiracism has, I mean, the John Birch Society in the 50s, and like, this is a long anti-communist conspiracy theory. This is a long tradition in the US. But there was, I mean, I think about even like in the 60s, 70s counterculture, there was a kind of conspiracism around, well, I mean, it was really kicked into overdrive by Nixon in Watergate, right? There's a sense that the US government cannot be trusted, the like revelations about MK Ultra, the COINTELPRO, like, and then in the Bush era, 9/11. So there were a lot of leftist 9/11 truthers in the 2000s. I mean, I think it was more of a leftist position at the time.
Do you think you're ever going to do an interview with this dude? He seems to have pretty varied guests, or his guests seem pretty varied ideologically. Maybe someday. After the lawsuit, 1 month, 1.5 months. One is early June.
I think that, sort of environmentalist fear of corporations and Monsanto, like much of which is reasonable, right? Also kind of overlapped with a general fear of chemicals, chemtrails, like I think that type of stuff is kind of continuous with anti-vaccination, and even being anti-vax, like was kind of like a California liberal like thing, like it was like Jenny McCarthy and like, I don't know, it was these like Hollywood celebrities who were anti-vax, and like it was punchy, Whereas now, I mean, how did it become so right-wing? Well, Obama, I guess, I think played some part in it, in that like, I mean, Alex Jones was like...
You talked to him on Bridges, yeah, but not on his show.
He hated Bush, but he really hated Obama. And then I think the kind of general like, largely like racist anti-Obama backlash that manifested as like Tea Party overlapped with a lot of conspiracism about, and like, ancient tropes were resurrected about like the Federal Reserve having been founded by Rothschilds and because they sunk the Titanic and all this kind of stuff. Like, I remember that after the 2008 financial crisis, like all that stuff was resurrected by, there was a kind of, I guess, anarcho-capitalist conspiracism about...
Okay, we get it. Good job. Can you send this to your mom? Sending this to my mom and saying, pray for our troops. An American fighter jet was attacked by a shark in the Strait of Hormuz.
What?
Oh, he ejected. Thank God. Close call. What did she reply? Mashallah, even the sharks are Shia. 100% real. Thanks. You can end stream now. I'm going to sleep. Thank you so much, Matthew. Okay. I'll be back to full streams on the 24th. I love you. Be careful, don't die. Wait, code knowledge check. 97% vibe coder will fumble during interviews if asked what this is. Function does not equal bigger function inside of another function. Python.